For the record, my name is Henry Santana, at-large City Councilor, and I am the Chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. Today is March 10th, 2025. This hearing is being recorded. It is also being live-streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcasted on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Files Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.ps@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of the hearing. Individuals will be called on in the order in which they signed up and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you are interested in testifying in person, please add your name to the sign-up sheet near the entrance of the chamber. If you are looking to testify virtually, please email our Central Staff Liaison, Shane Pack, at shane.pack@boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. Today's hearing is on dockets number 0128. Communication was received from the Police Commissioner, Michael Cox, in accordance with Section 3 of the Boston Trust Act regarding civil immigration detainer results for calendar year 2024. This matter was a report of a public officer and was referred to the committee on January 8th. Docket number 0414, order for a hearing to audit the implementation and effectiveness of the 2014 Boston Trust Act. This matter was sponsored by Councilors Julia Mejia, Rusi Luigen, and Enrique Pepen, and was referred to the committee on February 5th, 2025. Today I am joined by my colleagues in order of arrival: Councilor Ed Flynn, Councilor Enrique Pepen, Councilor John Fitzgerald, Councilor Aaron Murphy, Councilor Mejia, and Council President Rusi Luigen. Before I turn it over to my council colleagues for quick opening remarks, I am going to turn it over to Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, who is joining us virtually, who will lead us in a grounding. Reverend Mariana White-Hammond, do we have you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I want to begin by acknowledging that today is the day that in 1913, Harriet Tubman crossed over from this life into the next. And so I just think it is worth reminding ourselves of the deep history of our nation and those people who sacrificed to bring us to this moment. And so I also ask that we enter a posture of prayer, and often I find myself in this moment speechless as things that are happening in our country and world at times make me wonder what moment we are in. And so I want to take an opportunity to turn to our sacred scriptures. I recognize the separation between church and state, but I cannot forget that on this day, many of our Muslim brothers and sisters are in fasting in the season of Ramadan, in a time where they take time to stop and reflect, to really ask whether they are living the lives that God calls them to. And it is a season in which they are called to turn their hearts back to those central teachings. I also want to take an opportunity to acknowledge that our Jewish siblings are in a season where they are preparing in 2 days' time on Thursday night to begin the festival of Purim. And I will read a scripture related to that. And then for those of us who are in a season of Lent, where we deeply look at the life and teaching of Jesus as we prepare for the season of Easter. And so I will not give my own words as I usually do, but just read 2 passages, first from Esther and then from Luke. And it says, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he only went as far as the king's gate because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter in. And in every province in which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for the people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed Hathach to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he said back this answer: do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And then in Luke 10, we hear these words. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus replied, how do you read it? And the expert said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. I know that you will hear from many people, and I know that we are a country where there is separation from church, between church and state. And yet I know the founding fathers of this country, and yea, of this city, drew their principles from these passages that I've read. I, as the priest in the story, cannot pass by. And for many of you who are Levites, those who were community leaders, those who were actually some of the sort of government officials within the Jewish context, my prayer for you is that as you obey all of the things that you are asked to do and all of the challenges and nuance of governing, some of which I know well, that you will not forget these teachings, these sacred, ancient teachings that apply so well to the moment that we are in. My blessings over you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend White Hammond. Really appreciate you grounding us in today's hearing. We're going to continue moving forward. Before we have, so just from order of operations, I'm going to allow my council colleagues, starting with the lead sponsor, to give brief opening remarks. We will then transition over to, there's a few public testimony before going into our first panel for councilors to be able to ask questions. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Councilor Mejia, who is the lead sponsor on this matter. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for working alongside our office to make sure that we have an opportunity for people to be heard and giving Rev. Mariama White Hammond an opportunity to ground us in this work. So today we're not here to debate whether the Boston Trust Act should exist, because we know that it should. Instead, we are here providing a platform for leaders across education, religion, and business leaders, and across all sectors to share their insights on how federal and local policies are impacting our immigrant loved ones, who are in turn shaping Boston's cultural identity, the economy, and overall the quality of life. We've heard from folks that are those who are experiencing fear are not accessing health care, they're not sending their children to schools, they are not going to work, and what we'd like to do is center the reality of this conversation around what we know this moment is calling for us to do, and is to really think about the Trust Act in a larger context of spaces and places. And so I wanted to just ground us in that, knowing that we have an opportunity here as community to really help our colleagues understand what families are experiencing, and the hope is that we can do something about it. The Boston Trust Act clearly defines the role of the Boston Police Department in relation to ICE's enforcement and removal operations and Homeland Security investigations divisions. Let's dispel some of these myths, and so we go into this hearing all on the same page, and we're all operating from a premise based on the facts, not misinformation. The Trust Act does allow the BPD to collaborate with ICE on critical public safety issues, including human trafficking, child exploitation, drug and weapon trafficking, cyber crimes. However, it prevents from civil immigration enforcement. As we move in this hearing, I urge everyone to listen to the voices of the leaders who witness these impacts firsthand. Immigrants live, work, and practice their faith and build their lives in Boston. These leaders understand how the lack of clear, accessible legal information affects our immigrant communities, ability to engage in their daily quality of life and ultimately within our city departments. So let's take this opportunity to learn from their experiences and ensure our policies reflect the realities that we see on the ground. And so you will see that our testimony folks are set up from different areas of experiences, and that's what we're here to do. And listen, I believe, I'm not sure if you're going to read into the record, having a conversation with the administration, it was also really important for us to recognize that the mayor went to DC and did an amazing job in standing up for immigrants and standing in solidarity. We were here in the city of Boston affirming the work that she was doing on behalf of our undocumented loved ones. And so we want to make sure that we continue with that as we have this conversation. The Trust Act is working. And what we're here to do is understand the areas of opportunity to expand outside of what already exists by law. So I wanted to just make that really clear as we continue to have this conversation. And I believe you're gonna read something into the record.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Mejia. I will, after my colleagues give their open remarks, I will read the letter that we received from the administration into the record. So thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm going to now go to the other lead sponsors, and then I'm going to go to my other colleagues in order of arrival. I'm going to put 3 minutes on, so just try to make a quick opening remark. Council President Ruth Sulijan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Councilor Mejia for filing this. I won't need 3 minutes. I will say that the Trust Act is important because it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, the trust, building that trust between our police department and our immigrant communities who are here and who are residents, who are our neighbors, and who are providing every day for their families and contributing to our economy, paying taxes. And it just clarifies that our officers, that our law enforcement are focused on local law enforcement. It doesn't prohibit the federal government from doing their job. It just clarifies what our job is. And I want to echo last week, there was a great showing of solidarity with our immigrant communities last Wednesday here at City Hall as our mayor testified on the reasons why we are the safest big city. And it's because we are working every day to make sure that we have a city where everyone feels like they belong and where our law enforcement are working on their behalf. And so I want to thank all of the community members who are here to give testimony and the advocates. I think there's still work for us to do in terms of making sure that all of our residents know what their rights are whenever there are interactions with federal law enforcement, knowing that there's a distinction between our law enforcement and federal agents. And so I just want to thank you all for being here, because I still think that there's more work for us to do in terms of education and knowledge in this environment that presents to be very challenging. And I want to thank this body that last December unanimously reaffirmed the Trust Act and our commitment as a body and alongside the mayor to making sure that all of our residents, regardless of immigration status, feel safe. So thank you.
Thank you, Council President. At this time, I also like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilor Weber and Councilor Durkin. With that, I'm going to pass it over to the third co-sponsor, Councilor Pepin, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, I strongly here continue to support what is the Boston Trust Act and everything that it stands for. I'm also thankful that we get to hear directly from panelists who are doing the work on the ground every single day. I had the pleasure of joining some of you last week for that stand of solidarity on Wednesday, where we were able to see a lot of folks come together and show the immigrant community that we are here to make sure that Boston continues to be that safe city for them. And what I also want to make sure that we get out of today is that the city of Boston is a great city, as the mayor said, not in spite of our immigrants, but it's because of our immigrants. And I think that what we have here in Boston is very unique because we are showing the rest of the country that we are able to collaborate with federal agencies when it is appropriate, but at the same time showing our immigrant communities that our police department is a community-oriented police department, and they should feel safe to do that as well. So I'm here to make sure that we are able to elevate that message and show that the Boston Trust Act works, and that we should be able to continue to show the rest of the country what we're doing here in Boston, and to learn a little bit more of how everything that's been going on the past several months has been impacting our community. So thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pepin. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for holding this hearing along with the other sponsors as well. I just returned from a National League of Cities conference this weekend and met with city officials from around the country, and we discussed and advocated against federal cuts to various programs. I'm concerned about the impact on the city of Boston, including public safety, if federal grants are cut. In the last couple of years, we approved grants for $13 million and $11 million that provided funding for public safety, not only for here in Boston, but also throughout greater Boston as well. Cuts to federal public safety grants will hamper the ability of our law enforcement to protect our residents. Politics should not be a consideration when it comes to public safety. Boston is a city of immigrants. We have always been compassionate and welcoming to those in search of a better life for them and their families. I'm proud that Mayor Flynn built the Immigrant Gateway Memorial outside on Congress Street. And Mayor Flynn also started the Immigration Rights Unit, which is now the Office of Immigrant Advancement. We don't want to harm neighbors who have been here for generations and part of the community, working difficult jobs in our kitchens and hotels, paying local taxes. We also want them to feel safe to report crimes. And at the same time, it is also important that we ensure the safety of our city and our residents when it comes to serious and violent crimes as well. It is critical, and I think we all agree, that when someone commits a crime, regardless of immigration status, that we don't stand in the way of justice for the victim, the survivor, or their family. We must respect the rule of law and society and our neighbors. Boston Police must always cooperate and work closely with federal and state partners on violent and serious crimes, such as human trafficking, child exploitation, drug and weapons trafficking, cyber crimes. As it relates to the other docket number that you highlighted, Mr. Chair, as part of this discussion, there was a large discrepancy in the detainer request numbers. Boston Police said it was 15, while the Immigration and Custom Enforcement said it was around 198. In the interest of transparency, it is important that our body and the public are provided with clarification. I hope we're able to get that clarification today. That's why I have a separate hearing order on that issue. It is critical that we get Boston Police, state, federal partners on the same page with a positive working relationship when it comes to addressing violent and serious offenses that impact public safety in all of our neighborhoods. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Fitzgerald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to be here today and listen to the panels to understand how the Boston Trust Act has either affected or will continue to affect our immigrant community, either positively or negatively, and understand your experiences on the ground in dealing with it. I also think there's been a lot of misinformation on what the Boston Trust Act does or does not do, so I look forward to you all helping us clarify what exactly it does and does not do, because I think there's, again, people have a misinterpretation about that, and I want to make sure they understand very much what this does. The Trust Act does help build trust between law enforcement and immigrant communities, making it more likely that people will work with the police, not hide from them. When residents, regardless of their immigration status, feel safe reporting crimes, it makes our entire city safer. We've long been a city that welcomes immigrants. I think this act reaffirms that commitment while making sure our police can do their jobs effectively. So I hope we continue to stand by policies that promote that collaboration and look forward to hearing from your all experiences. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald. Councilor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this hearing. Thank you for the panelists. I'm looking forward to hearing the panelists. I know we don't have administration here. Is that true, Chair?
That is correct.
But are we doing both dockets, even if one of the dockets would have needed administration, or are we just focusing on one? Because I want to make sure I'm clear with my opening statements.
I wanted to pass it over to the lead sponsor, Councilor Mejia.
Okay,
Councilor
thank
Mejia.
you.
Sure. I would be more than happy to yield that answer. we decided to, in the interest of making sure that we ground ourselves in community as it relates to the Trust Act, because the goal is for us to figure out how we can strengthen it. What we want to do is create an opportunity for the panelists to really talk about what that could potentially look like in other spaces. And as it relates to the administration, we're going to be reading a letter into the record in regards to how it's working and what are the areas of, pain points, if there are any, that is going to be discussed at a later date.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that clarification. So I say this all the time. I know growing up here, 55 years here in the city, and I love as an at-large councilor visiting all the neighborhoods across the city. We're a city of neighborhoods, and it's the rich, diverse cultural differences that really make our city strong. And when you go across, all the different neighborhoods, streets, shops, businesses, we have a rich city because of our immigrants, right? I'm granddaughter of 4 immigrants who came here from Ireland over 100 years ago. We're also a city that I believe continues to foster and have inclusive community like we do in our schools. I know, Suzanne Lee, you'll speak, I hope, a lot about how our students are feeling and our teachers are feeling at this time now in our city. But we also have to make sure that, we're not hindering any of the laws that do need to be followed, and at that, making sure also, and I think Council Fitzgerald mentioned it, that I believe that the Trust Act has a clear delineation and does make it clear for law enforcement what their boundaries are. And I believe and I hope, and if we need to have that hearing on the other hearing order, that our police are not, breaking any laws. And I do think that's the concerns I get from both sides. But I do hope that we can continue to make sure that all of the residents here in the city of Boston feel safe, and that we're not hearing stories about students missing school, families, not being able to pay their rent because mom or dad don't feel safe going to work, or that, they're just not enjoying life. We all know that it's important that we get out and enjoy this one life that we have, so making sure that we continue to do what we can on this side in the city. At the same time, enforcing just trusting that our police are doing what they need to, and at the same time knowing that whatever support we can give to our communities, we continue to. So thank you. Look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Weber, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Councilors Mejia and Louis Jen for setting up that, the rally we had last Wednesday in support of the mayor and support of our community. I was proud to participate in that. I think we all know that the attacks on the Boston Trust Act are not about public safety. I don't think any of the people in Washington, D.C. talking about our Trust Act care about the public safety of people in Boston, but more to the point, there is not the public safety impact that they're talking about. Instead, these attacks are designed to spread fear. I think we've all heard stories about fear in our communities, about parents being afraid to send their kids to school, telling them to run home right after school in case something happens, about people not going to work. And I'm happy we're having this conversation today, so we can see what we can do to strengthen the Boston Trust Act and strengthen what we do as a city for our residents, and to continue to fight for a city that includes everyone and is the safest city in the country. And so, thank you to to Councilor Mejia for filing this, and look forward to being part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. Councilor Durkin, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Santana. When the Boston Trust Act was unanimously passed in 2014, it sent a bold and compassionate statement that Boston would codify a clear message. Our city's resources, our personnel, and our priorities should not and would not tear families apart under civil immigration detainers, while allowing for resources to be smartly expended when matters of significant public safety were apparent. Today, 10 years later, our City Council reaffirmed it, and it's essential that we reaffirm a commitment to ensuring that the Trust Act is not just a statement of values, but a living, breathing document that continues to function as intended. I'm honored and humbled to sit in the current seat of the counselor who sponsored the Trust Act, Counselor Josh Lakem, and speak on behalf of its defense today. The work of protecting immigrant communities is not static. It requires vigilance, transparency, and accountability. I'm honored to have gotten the opportunity to sit behind Mayor Wu as she testified before Congress last week. Her resilience, strength, and defense of our city truly inspired me. Most importantly, I appreciate this hearing. I appreciate Councilor Mejia's leadership. We do have to ask ourselves the question, is the Trust Act still providing the protections our residents need in the case of in the legal and political climate of 2025? To our undocumented neighbors, I want you to hear clearly from this body that Boston is your home. I remain deeply committed to ensuring that the Trust Act continues to serve in a way that builds bonds between all residents in Boston, no matter the documentation, so that Boston remains safe and one of the safest cities in America. Dignity and due process are not negotiable, they're foundational. Look forward to this robust discussion today.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. At this point now, we're going to go over to before we go to our first panel, we are going to hear from the public. So we're going to take a few people from public testimony. We're going to give you 2 minutes to testify. Before that, I am going to read, not the entire, so every counselor has this packet in front of them from the administration. We received this from the Director of Intergovernmental Relationships, Claire Kelly. I'll read this, just the first page into the record. But anyone from the public who does want this, please email Shane Pack, Central Liaison, and we can give you access to this document. So, dear Chair Santana, thank you for hosting this hearing on docket number 0414, order for a hearing to audit the implementation and effectiveness of the 2014 Trust Act, and docket number 0128. Communication was received from the Police Commissioner Michael A. Cox in accordance with Section 3 of the Boston Trust Act regarding civil immigration detainer results for calendar year 2024. Last week, Mayor Michelle Wu testified at the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee hearing in Washington, D.C. on the Boston Trust Act. I've attached her written statement for your reference. Our administration will be listening in to today's hearing, and we look forward to hearing from the residents across Boston. Sincerely, Claire Kelly, Director of Intergovernmental Relations. Awesome. Thank you. So we are now going to go with public testimony, and you'll have 2 minutes to testify. Please state your name and your affiliation. And in person, we're going to start with in person, and then we're going to go, I think we have a few people as well virtually. Do we have Kevin Batt? Great. Thank you for being with us, Kevin. You'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Councilor Santana, and a special thanks to you for meeting with me at your coffee hour and several of us who support immigrant rights in Jamaica Plain. First, I wanted to shout out to the mayor, who's of course not here, but I hope she hears us. It was just a remarkable appearance before Congress. She was strong, she had grace, she was unflappable, and I think she put the folks that believe in lawlessness to the point. She raised great points about how we in Boston are complying with the law, and the folks in ICE often are not. I was also among the hundreds that joined you out for the rally to support the mayor's appearance, so thank you for organizing that. I wanted to just point out, in light of the hearing, that the feds cannot commandeer local law enforcement. The Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia in 1997, in a case brought by Colorado sheriffs that did not want to comply with any local duties to enforce background checks on gun purchasers, were told by Antonin Scalia in his ruling that local law enforcement cannot be commandeered to enforce federal law. Exactly what we have here. The federal ICE folks are trying to get Commissioner Homan is trying to get local law enforcement against the Trust Act to enforce federal immigration law. And that's just not lawful. The Boston Trust Act is the local law. We have a Supreme Court decision on point as well. You, as counselors, are great in terms of trying to support the Boston Trust Act here, strengthen it. We hope Commissioner Cox is also ensuring that all of his police down to the beat are also complying with the Trust Act. It's very important because, as you all stated, this is a way that we keep our communities safe. Law enforcement can definitely work with federal and immigration authorities for criminal and violent crimes, as Councilor Mejia pointed out. But in terms of civil detainer requests, there's no obligation for them to respond to those requests. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate it. And appreciate you being here. We're going to just move to virtual. I know we have a few people who want to testify virtually. If you are testifying virtually, please accept the message asking you to be prompted to a panelist when it appears. So just, we have Sean Nelson, and then I'm going to go Aaron Dockster and Louise Murray. So Sean Nelson, you have 2 minutes.
Two means two. You have to unmute.
I think you're on mute, Sean.
Sorry about that. I'm going to make this quick. The Trust Act should be ended. You are not cooperating with the federal government with taking out illegal immigration. Let's make that very clear. This has nothing to do with those who came here legally. You actually are disrespecting the hard work they had to go do to come into this country to allow people to break out federal laws and to protect them. This is nothing more than Democrats trying to foster new voters to what they did back in the late 1800s to the early 1900s while using immigrants to bolster their voting rights, which will take away from black voters in Boston. No one's trying to co-opt the police to go do anything. If they have a detainee who is illegal, all the ICE is asking them is to hold that person for a certain amount of time so they can actually walk into the police station, do it safely. And as for Michelle Wu's performance, I was in the room. She was pathetic. Most of you are just kissing her behind because election time is up, and you're trying to hopefully that she'll favor you for an endorsement or give you a nice little position in the government as a bureaucrat. As a citizen of Boston, I want this to end. Do not use this platform to go push your agenda, the Democrats' agenda. Stop putting your party over the people. And I hope when Tom Holmes does come here, all of you who voted for that act should be locked up. And you should have been at that oversight committee answering to Congress why you are endangering the public safety of Boston. None of you have the right to be on that council right now. And I hope he comes in and arrests all of you. And as for that rally, don't forget you had a counter rally with the citizens of Boston being held by Catherine Vitale. So don't sit there was nobody else out there pushing against your agenda. Again, as a citizen of Boston, I am now telling you to cooperate with ICE and end the Trust Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Aaron Dockser. Please unmute yourself. And
yes, thank you. So my name is Aaron Dockser. I live in Mattapan. Thank you, councilors, for holding this hearing and reaffirming your commitment to all the residents in our city. I urge you to increase Boston's efforts to protect all the people in our great city, regardless of where they come from, or who is in the White House, or who the federal government and their billionaire controllers attempt to demonize. That means holding to the commitments in the Boston Trust Act and expanding them to make sure that immigrants feel safe in Boston, to bring their unique contributions to our city for all of our benefit. Most importantly, I would point to ways in which we must expand protections to students and their families, as K-12 schools and colleges and universities have been identified as a new site of struggle by the current anti-immigrant federal administration. I'll just note, of course, they're targeting public education. My partner and I have lived all over Massachusetts before deciding to make Boston our permanent home. Reading, Somerville, Waltham, Quincy. We're an interracial couple who work in the field of education. She's a staffer at a prestigious university. I'm a union organizer. We come from different religious backgrounds as well. When we decided to settle in Mattapan, it was because of the diversity of the community, because we knew that we and our future children would encounter people from all walks of life and places in the world here, that we would eat food from around the world, hear languages from around the world, because our schools would be full of people who came from different places and cultures, but have the shared goals of learning and contributing to our great city, while they build a better life for themselves and their family. We knew these things make a community strong from our experience in our own relationship and our public school educations and our current work. We're proud to live in Boston. That's a city for all. The Boston Trust Act was a step in the right direction to protect this diversity and safety. More is required of us as the brown shirts escalate their efforts to terrorize our communities, including targeting for deportation college protesters most recently. That cannot be accepted in Boston. I'm deeply concerned that some people are intent on bending the knee or kissing the ring of our wannabe dictators due to fear of damaged relationships or cuts to funding. I'm upset that there's a question about whether we should be increasing collaboration with federal officials in making people in our city feel more unsafe, more precarious, more watched, more at risk of deportation because of where they come from. Immigrants make this city strong. Immigrants should feel safe reporting crimes, knowing they will be treated the same as any other Bostonian. I'm the descendant of immigrants, the lucky ones who managed to migrate here, while others were turned away to die in concentration camps. We are not a city of people who turn those in need away. We're a city of helpers who use our resources to make everyone safe, a city whose differences bind us together. So in the face of attacks on our residents, I would just urge you all to consider ways of increasing and expanding the Boston Trust Act. Thank you very much for all of your help.
Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us today. We're going to take one more person from for public testimony, and then we're going to go into our first panel. Do we have Lewis Murray with us online?
Yes, you do.
All right. Thank you so much for
Just
being
give
with
me a
us.
minute. I'm trying to pull up my comments.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to have that, and I think that's all we have. Right?
Okay.
Online? Okay.
Yes, my name is Lewis Murray. I'm a taxpayer, property owner. I live in Ward 20, West Roxbury. For the last 11 years, I'm a co-founder of the Bostonians Against Sanctuary City. And I wanted to give testimony today. Councilor Mejia said that the drug traffickers are specifically exempt, and I want to bring up a case in 2018 after the Boston police got rid of Edward Gallagher as their ICE appointed officer who is a liaison to ICE. Many Boston police officers reached out to individuals like myself so that we could report crimes that were happening in our neighborhood likely with illegal aliens. And I'm going to submit all this as written testimony as well, but please bear with me. On November 17th, 2018, after a months-long stakeout, a trafficker of heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and marijuana, not a low-level dealer, a trafficker, was arrested by the Boston police about 3/4 of a mile from my home on the Roslindale, West Roxbury line, about 1/4 mile from Mayor Wu. This illegal immigrant had mutilated fingerprints and a co-criminal with him. When the police came in the door, they armed themselves with knives and were fending off the Boston police as they dumped the drugs down the drain. When they were able to finally figure out in the afternoon of the arrest that these indeed were illegal alien criminals, the one criminal that didn't have his fingerprints burned off was identified because he was wanted on multiple rape charges in Lawrence, Massachusetts. These were the charges that and I called ICE. ICE went to the West Roxbury Courthouse.
Thank you, Louis.
And attempted to retrieve both these criminals.
If you can just wrap it up.
Possession to distribute Class A substance. Possession to distribute Class B substance. Conspiracy to violate drug law. Furnishing false names. The head trafficker got another charge added. But the bottom line here is that Judge Mary Driscoll set bail at $2,500 and the surrender of passports. I think Rudolph Villar Santana, who was the criminal that had his fingerprints burned off, he had a $5,000 bail. Eventually, ICE had to leave after waiting for 24 hours.
That's 2 minutes. I tried to give you.
They were.
If you can just please also, you can send your testimony via email as well. Thank you so much to our people who joined us. With that, we're now going to go to our first panel. I would like to introduce today's first panel, and then then you can all introduce yourselves as well, and then we're going to turn it over to counselors' questions. So with that, I know we have a combination of in-person and virtual. So with us today, we have Amy Grunder, I think, who's joining us virtually, who's Director of the State and Government Affairs with Mira Coalition. Angela Palma with us in person, women's rights organizer with Centro Presente. Susan Lee with us today in person, who wears many hats, but is an educator. And with us virtually, we have Michelle Etienne, assistant pastor, voice of the gospel church. So please, if you can all just introduce yourselves, and then any opening remarks or presentation that you all may want to give, and then I'll turn it over to my council colleagues for questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Palma. I am the daughter of immigrants from El Salvador, and I grew up here in Boston, and I am a women's rights organizer at Centro Presente, located in East Boston. I want to share a part of the history of the grassroots struggle for the Trust Act in Boston. The story begins with the George W. Bush administration piloting a data sharing program called Source Communities in 2008. This program coordinated efforts between all levels of law enforcement, from federal to state to local. The late Mayor Menino actually had Boston secretly participating in that pilot. President Obama officially rolled out the Secure Communities program, and then Governor Deval Patrick announced his intention to sign Massachusetts into it. Centro Presente immediately responded by appearing at every immigration listening session that the governor held as part of our Just Communities campaign. Governor Patrick would eventually decline to enroll in that program, and Mayor Menino also removed Boston from aspects of Secure Communities. Out of this effort, Centro Presente forged a partnership with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, NDLON, with whom we would begin to fight for state legislation in 2012 that would clearly separate the enforcement of federal immigration law from local law enforcement. To move forward this Trust Act, leaders at Centro Presente, Patricia Montes and Jose Palma, and many more began a year of organizing and then called the first meeting of the Massachusetts Trust Act Coalition. Many organizations joined, including the Brazilian Workers Center, a key ally in launching the campaign. In 2013, representatives of our coalition met with State Senator Jamie Eldridge and former Representative Carlos Cortino, who became sponsors of the Trust Act. Sadly, there was little political will to move immigration policy forward in a state house run entirely by Democrats. We pivoted to a local strategy where many local elected officials and law enforcement chiefs recognize the importance of community policing and a strong relationship of trust with the immigrant community. We found an enthusiastic and active ally in former Somerville Mayor Joe Cortino. With his support, an executive order was passed to implement the provisions of the Trust Act in Somerville. In 2015, Centro Presente left the Trust Act process with a campaign and a bill that changed its name. We are grateful to the organizations that continue this important work, and we provide this background to preserve historical memory that is so important for documenting the lessons we have learned in the past, for recognizing those that stood beside us when needed, and for making sure that those who were not present can learn from our experiences. The Trust Act has had a long road and is still relevant and so important at a time when our community is under attack.
afternoon. Is it on? Okay. My name is Suzanne Lee. I am, like you said, I wear many hats, and I'm going to contain myself to being educator today. 35 years in the Boston Public Schools, a teacher, a coach, and finally principal. And I retired as one of the most effective principal in the system. They call me a legend. I don't know what, but that's what they are. And I hope that it has something to do with how I ran my school, and for 35 years, what I have done for particularly immigrant children. And coming from an immigrant community where my grandfather came here as a 12-year-old back in the early 1900s. And my father came in the 1930s after his brother was killed in East Boston. My mother came to reunited with my father in 1950, and I didn't get to come until 1960. So why am I sharing all this with you? Because this whole issues of immigrant rights is deeply personal to me. Policy that's made by city and states and federal have huge impact on people's lives. And when they make those laws, people don't realize it, who they impact. And I'm going to focus on talking about particularly the children. So I know the Trust Act is about how police conduct business. But our children are not immune. That we cannot talk about policies and laws as if it's in isolation. Anything that happens in the community, in the family, the children feels it. So the Trust Act does not touch on that at all. When you talk about you want everybody to feel safe, well, I know our children do not. And when they don't feel safe, and it's not only the immigrant children, not only what people call them undocumented, because when you go to school, nobody knows not supposed to know who is who. But the children who come from immigrant families sometimes don't know what their status is either. And the children feels that. And what do they bring to the school? And I've seen that firsthand, and then more story now. When children don't feel safe and worry about their parents, and worry about whether or not when they get home, their parents will be there, or whether or not they have jobs that can provide for them, usually a few things happen. They don't focus. They tend to act out. And some of you who knows a lot about classrooms, so when you have one or two students act out, what happened to the rest of them? It has an impact on them, right? So what if we put the MCAS in place, all this testing in place, want to see how well the school is doing for our students? None of those testing really show you how important the state of mind and how students feel, how well they can do. You cannot learn unless you have the mental capacity to feel safe and then open your mind to learn. So it's not only those children who feel in the media and has that impact on how they're thinking and get the vibe from the community and from their parents, workplace, and how adults talk. They're going to impact on the rest of the classroom. I remember standing out in this, getting kids from the bus, and I deliberately do that from time to time so I can see in their face what kind of day it's going to be. As soon as they step off the bus, if I see something, I have to escort and ask the students to come and have a cup of tea or something with me, because I knew that if I don't deal with that right at the beginning, that classroom, that whole day is going to be shot. So where do we talk about that in the Trust Act? When we talk about safe community and safe classroom, we don't talk about that. And that mental image that they have in their head is going to be there for a long, long time as they grow up. And that's why we see so much trauma, so much, particularly in our teenagers. Children can only react to things that they hear and feel. So if they hear in the news, somebody, they don't know who ICE is, but somebody is coming to get you. And parents show that fear. And I know that in some families, they would devise a plan. If something happened, you need to do this and this and this. That also impacts on our youth. We talk a lot about youth capacity and youth resiliency. That is true. What is going to give them the resiliency and to survive this kind of trauma is up to us as responsible adults. And I'm so glad to have a city council now that want to have this conversation. How do we expand the Trust Act? Not just on, you're going to be protected if it's not a legal arrest or legal that. None of that makes any difference if they do make a mistake. For those families and those children that are impacted, that's going to have a scar. So how do we? And I look forward to that kind of discussion because it has to be on just the letter of the law and what we put on paper, how we talk in public, how our leaders, you all, in everyday context, and when you have opportunity to stand up as leaders to talk, the tone that you set makes a huge difference. And I know that all the educators that are very anxious, then what do I do if I'm on duty out in the street in Squinnet and ICE happen to come by or they come, what do I do? Every single educators have that in their head. And that's going to wear on them. They cannot focus so much on teaching and learning when you have all these other stuff wearing on you. Sometimes they don't say that to their principal. They would tell me, to somebody like me, who is not directly their supervisor. I hear those. And I just finished some training with a group of parents, mentors, 80 of them, and mostly Spanish-speaking and some Haitians and some Somali parents. Every single one of them can tell me that they have friends and neighbors that they know that do not send their kids to school or that they're afraid to go to work. So I look at them, I said, well, you're here. Why are you not afraid? They said, well, somebody have to come and get the information so I can share with them. So we have that going on in our community. So the more that we can do as leaders to give a positive and real concrete way to alleviate that fear will go a long way. So I hope that the Trust Act can do some of that, but I don't know yet how. But let's have that conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we also have, again, we have Amy and Michelle on Zoom. I also want to introduce another one of the panelists for this first panelist, Dr. Nina Estrella Luna, founder of the Estrella Luna Consultant. You're joining us here today. Do you have any open remarks that you want to provide?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And just for clarification, it's Star Luna Consulting.
Oh, sorry.
Not all the people control their R's like you can. And, so thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today about the Boston Trust Act and this order to review the act and its implementation. What I'd like to start with is emphasizing both the importance but also the historic precedence of the Boston Trust Act. This law is nothing new for Boston. Boston, number one, has been a sanctuary for those needing protection going back to our original foundings and to the origin of the city of Boston as a city under this United States. And Boston as a city has actually resisted federal efforts to impose obligations that we don't agree with. That is part of our history also. For example, I think We can be proud of Boston's refusal to capitulate to the many federal initiatives around the fugitive slave laws in the 19th century. Slave laws that were imposed by Congress in the early and middle part of the 19th century. And I think it's important to remember that these federal fugitive slave laws were imposed on the states like Massachusetts at the behest of what were the oligarchs of the 19th century. People who were determined to maintain systems of oppression and marginalization, people who were determined to maintain systems of white supremacy. Boston, let's be clear, was by no means innocent in any of these systems, but it did, to its credit, resist forced complicity with the enslavement of black people. So when the federal government, through Congress and with the support of the Supreme Court, imposed the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, Boston resisted. The law mandated that local authorities, what at the time were local law enforcement, assist with the seizure of self-emancipated black people and return them to slavery. It also allowed citizens, civilians, to be deputized in order to enforce the return of human beings to enslavement. And Boston said, no. The citizens and the city of Boston successfully prevented the seizure of many emancipated black people. However, in 1854, a federal judge, not a local judge, a federal judge forced the return of Anthony Burns, a self-emancipated black man, to slavery. Burns was seized from our jails, from a Boston jail, and returned to enslavement. In response, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts enacted the Personal Liberty Law in 1855 to prevent any further complicity with enslavement by requiring, by the way, due process of law, by enforcing rights. So I see the Boston Trust Act as a descendant, if you will, of that personal liberty law, adapted to the modern era. Boston's Trust Act makes clear that we are not agents of the federal government, and we can choose not to participate in the enforcement of federal civil laws that are contrary to our values and that actually harm the city, harm our neighbors. This hearing order is about reviewing the Trust Act itself. When policy scholars like myself, that is what I do, when we do this kind of evaluation, we look at two things. One thing we look at is whether the policy itself, the words, the text in the statute, and the text in the law, is structured and designed to achieve its goals. That's the first thing we look at. The other thing we look at is whether the implementation of the policy is done in such a way that it meets both the spirit and also the text and articulated goals of the law. These are two different things, and given that this policy has been in place for 10 years, and more importantly, given the moment that we're in, I would encourage the council to spend time looking at both. I will say, having looked at the text of the law myself, I can definitely say, law's pretty decent. Good job, City Council 10 years ago. But there are ways to strengthen it and to minimize unintended negative consequences. Again, especially in this moment. There are ways that the law can be strengthened given who is currently being targeted and how they're being targeted. Another area that could be strengthened is where the Act does support cooperation with federal immigration officials. Here, there is a need for more specificity to ensure that we do not get caught up in overly broad definitions of criminal violations currently embedded in immigration law. And there's other things that we can talk about, so I want to respect the time. I'm at time for my remarks, but I will invite questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think with us on Zoom, do we have Amy Grunder from Mira, and then Michelle from the Assistant Pastor. do you have any opening remarks?
I just have a brief 2-minute testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Awesome. You can go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank the Council President Ruth G. Louis-Jean and Chair Julia Mejia and the members of the Public Safety Committee for the opportunity to participate in this important hearing regarding the Boston Trust Act. My name is Amy Grunder. I am Director of State Government Affairs at the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, a statewide organization founded in 1987. And we're a coalition of 140 or so immigrant serving organizations ranging from immigrant-led community groups to worker centers, unions, faith organizations, and really service providers of every type. MIRA's mission is to convene, serve, and organize together with members and our allies for the advancement of all immigrants, regardless of where they came from or how they got here. MIRA has supported the Boston Trust Act since it was first enacted in 2014 and worked with the City Council to improve the ordinance again in 2019. We have welcomed the recent reaffirmation of this ordinance. It has done so much to build the confidence of Boston's immigrant communities in all of Boston's public institutions, not just law enforcement. We're grateful for the commitment of the Boston City Council, the mayor, and the Boston's Police Commissioner Cox to the Trust Act, especially now when these communities and Boston's public servants are under attack by the federal government. We're also grateful to the City Council for its recent endorsement of 3 state bills that would extend the positive impact of the Boston Trust Act statewide, including the Safe Communities Act, which would give all Massachusetts state's residents the security of knowing that they can safely approach our police and our court officials for protection from exploitation and crime without fear of immigration consequences, and ensure that public safety resources are spent on public safety, not civil immigration enforcement. Our member organizations confirm the uncertainty and fear in immigrant communities right now. And I would also say, and also the sense of incredible solidarity and support that they feel from Boston's Mayor Wu, from the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement, from this Boston City Council, and from Boston Police Commissioner Cox. Boston was one of the first municipalities to enact a Trust Act in Massachusetts and really a model for the rest of the state. As of 2023, there are now over 50 municipalities in Massachusetts that have enacted measures similar to the Boston Trust Act. Boston is a true leader in its commitment to its hardworking immigrant communities and an example to our 350 cities and towns in Massachusetts, to our state legislature, and to the nation. That said, there's always ways to strengthen and refine an ordinance, and we look forward to continued work with the Boston City Council at another time, and we thank you for your good work and commitment to our many immigrant communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us today. Do we have either Michelle, and then we're going to also have Nivea Pina, small business owner. Are you with us today?
Yes, this is Michelle Etienne Campbell. I'm the associate pastor of Voice of the Gospel Tabernacle Church in Mattapan Square. I am so happy to be with you all. Thank you to Councilwoman Julia Mejia for the invite, and greetings to the Council President, Ruth Jen, fellow Haitian person in the community. Just by way, the Voice of the Gospel Tabernacle in Mattapan serves nearly 300 Haitian community members in Boston, the majority of which are Haitian immigrants. And a larger majority are a boom of immigrants that we have seen come in over the last 10 to 15 years. Mattapan and Boston is the 3rd largest Haitian population of Haitians in the United States, as many of you already know, and Mattapan being the hub where most of those people live. And so we deal with and we see a lot within our community, and over the years, we know and we've experienced that many of these Haitian people, majority of them, are solid citizens or individuals who go to work and are hard workers and do the best raising their families in the way that they know how, based on how we were raised in our country. We've seen a huge boom over the last 15 years for a number of reasons. 2010, we had a massive earthquake that killed over 300,000 people in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, and dislocated a number, over millions of individuals, causing them to have to leave their home that they loved to travel to nearing countries and to United States. Then in 2021, we had another earthquake, and in addition to the assassination of the president at the time of Haiti, which has caused, in addition to social and just natural environmental problems for the community for Haiti, but also political unrest. And so we have a large number of people who have had to migrate from Haiti to the United States and neighboring countries. And as a pastor of this large community, and even in the community abroad under Bishop Nicholas Homestead, we have seen and we have heard harrowing stories of people who have had a lot of trauma traveling and migrating from Haiti, coming to the United States through Chile, through Cuba, and various countries. And so now with the situation being as it is, with the threats of ICE coming to take a lot of these people who, we do have a number who are undocumented, but the majority of them have received political asylum and are under the TPS program. And yet even those individuals who are working and are technically legally here, there is a huge threat and a huge fear of these individuals being removed from the country in a way that makes them feel like they're criminals, or seems like they're criminals when they really are not. And the children are being affected by it and have had traumas by it as well. And so I agree with many of the other panelists, and particularly I understand and have seen firsthand, similar to what the former principal was saying, that the trauma that these children have seen and that the families have seen have affected them. And under these new policies that we're seeing, many people are not going to schools, many are not coming to church. We have to do a huge educational push in terms of educating people about how to interact with ICE, what they should do. But the reality of it is if you are Black and brown, whether you are here legally or not, you're in danger, unfortunately, in this environment. And so we just need the support, and I'm here to lend my voice on behalf of these individuals, on behalf of the Haitian community, to say we need support and we need justice for our people as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us here today. Do we have Navia Pina with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. If you want to give
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Pina, I wear different hats as well. I'm not only the owner or co-owner of Tres Islas Group. We own Merengue, Doña Habana, The Gigantes, Merengue Express in the city. And I also work for Boston Public School as a teacher for the last 15 years. So I see many things happening. As a city, Boston is committed to protecting and supporting all of its residents, regardless of immigration status. Our police department is focused on ensuring public safety and does not act as an extension of federal immigration enforcement. Under the Boston Trust Act, our officers do not detain individuals based solely on ICE requests without judicial warrant. However, despite these protections, I see firsthand the fear that exists in our communities. Many of my employees, who are mostly women, live in constant anxiety about their safety and the safety of their family. We are not criminals. Stop demonizing us because we just look different. As a teacher, I witnessed parents afraid of sending their children to school. worrying about what could happen if they step out of their homes. The fear is harmful to our community, our workplaces, and our school. Our teachers are also scared. The kids that we have in our classrooms are our kids as well. And we see the fear of losing their parents. It is heartbreaking for us. Boston remains a welcoming city, and we will continue to stand without our immigrant neighbors. No one should have to live in fear simply for trying to build a better future for their family. Our focus must be on fostering trust, ensuring access to education, and supporting those to contribute so much to our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nivea, for joining us. That's our first panel, so I know we have quite a few experts, people on the ground, people with lived experience, with different perspectives, and really appreciate all of you being able to join us today. So with that, we're going to turn it over to my council colleagues, starting with the lead sponsors, and then moving forward with the rest of my colleagues in order of arrival. I will give 6 minutes per counselor, and we'll do as many rounds as we need to, but we'll start with that, and we're going to start with Councilor Mejia, the lead sponsor. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I am really grateful for everyone who has provided context to this, because I think when we're talking about people, oftentimes things get really political, and we forget to ground ourselves in why we're all here. And so I want to thank everybody, even those who showed up with a different opinion. You know, we honor voice here. This is what democracy looks like. So regardless of what we believe, we appreciate you coming through and sharing your thoughts. The goal is to get to a place where everybody can really feel safe in this city. And I think that there's a lot of fireworks when it comes to this. And one of the first acts that I did here on the council in my maiden speech was around sanctuary spaces. And Dr. Estrella Luna, that is where I met you when I was a parent organizer in the city of Boston. I didn't know the first thing about anything. And I remember being in Elsa Flores, who's now a part of my staff, invited me to a meeting in East Boston where parents and residents were organizing, and I didn't know what I walked into, but there was a young man who had been deported, and it was BPS that had a hand in that. And as an organizer, I was really upset. We were like, we're gonna bring in BPS. We brought in the Office of Racial Equity, I think it was, and we wanted answers. And we knew that we were being discriminated against, but what we did not know is the magnitude of what that story really unfolded to be. And Lawyers for Civil Rights and, you know, everyone really started to organize. And that was my journey as a parent. And it was with that same spirit that I walked into the city council. My maiden speech was on sanctuary spaces. And this here, defanging anger, I got a hateful voicemail, very similar to some of the public testimony that we heard here today, calling me and my mother a criminal. And I think that that inflammatory language gets in the way of the work. And I want to name that because then I spoke up, even though when I was told that I should not call more attention to myself because I only had won by one vote. But if I didn't speak up then, I was going to allow people to continue to abuse people who were afraid to speak up. And so here we are, 5 years later, having the same conversation, and there's still so much tension. And that's why we decided that this hearing was going to be grounded with the people who are on the front lines doing this work to be able to help humanize this conversation. And so that's the framework here that we're like navigating within that context. So, Dr. Estrella, I know I have questions for everybody here, just so you know, questions for everybody. So I'm gonna name the questions, and then I'm just, so that you know, and then each of you are going to answer your specific question. So Dr. Estrella Luna, I'm going to ask you to give us a little bit more information about areas of where the council might be able to strengthen the act in the current moment that we are seeing. And as a review of the implementation of the act, what are some of the recommendations that we need to be leaning into? Our beloved Suzanne Lee, who, as you know, wear many hats, but this particular hat, I'm going to ask you to help us understand, as an educator, you see firsthand how immigration policies affect students and their families. What are some of the biggest challenges immigrant students face in Boston, and how our city could do a better job to support them, specifically around the fear of immigration enforcement? And the impact that it has on student learning and family engagement with our schools. How do you see this playing out, and what steps can we take to build trust with immigrant families and educational institutions? Michela, and I hope that you're still here with us, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the role that churches and faith-based organizations can play in bridging the gap between immigrant communities and city services, and what more can we do to strengthen that connection? You know, I got questions for everybody. And Nivea, as a business owner, if you're still here with us, you know, I'd love to talk a little bit about how federal immigration policies has affected your ability to hire and retain and support workers in your business. And I'm more interested in also learning what city leaders can understand about the role immigrant-owned businesses play in Boston's economic ecosystem, and what policies help them thrive. What I'm really getting at here from a business owner is, like, how are businesses, and what can the city of Boston do specifically to support immigrant-owned businesses who also, we know, may potentially have folks who are undocumented. They do have paperwork, they're paying their taxes, right? So there's this belief that workers are not paying their fair share, but folks who are working in spaces and places are, you know, documented to some extent. So I hope you all wrote your questions down. And I don't know, and Angela, if you could talk to us a little bit about the specific challenges that immigrant women face when navigating legal systems and workforce protections and access to services, and how do the federal immigration policies disproportionately impact immigrant women, in particular in Boston? Dad.
So no, as the lead sponsor, Julie, we're going to allow you to get your questions answered. So whoever wants to start with, I don't know who your first question was to, but.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, in part because I want to piggyback off of my a woman whose shoulders I get to stand on. Thank you, Suzanne, for being here. I want to start with this idea that the text of the Act itself, because it does say that it applies to non-law enforcement personnel, but this is where the Act can be a lot more explicit and a lot more clear. And this is particularly important now in this moment because we cannot no longer rely on federal law to protect people in ways that we could in the past. So, and as an example, with the Boston Public Schools, so Boston Public School personnel are prohibited from sharing information about students or their families' immigration status. It's actually not in the text of the law because the text of the law is so heavily focused on law enforcement, right? Now, other folks, as you know, my fellow educator on the panel here might say, accurately, hey, there's a federal law called FERPA that prohibits the sharing of student information. As a university professor, I relied heavily on FERPA to avoid having to deal with parents, to be honest. I love FERPA, but I also think we need to realize that we're not going to be able to rely on federal law and the enforcement of federal law, at least in the foreseeable future. So that's one piece, one bucket. I would encourage the council to look at how to make the Act more explicit about what non-law enforcement city personnel, what their obligations are under the Trust Act. What can non-law enforcement city staff do or not do? as we try to create an environment where our immigrant neighbors feel safe and ourselves as immigrants feel safe. I would, going back though to the law enforcement piece, and so this is sort of my legal scholar hat right now, there are references in the law that actually are part of its strength around cooperating, narrowing the cooperation of law enforcement only to criminal violations. And what I would encourage the council to explore is making those references a little bit more explicit so that they're aligned with how we actually define what a truly criminal act is. Because the Trust Act actually, in Section D2A, specifies cooperation with federal law, that when you follow the breadcrumbs, all the things that it references, the lawyers on over here know what I'm talking about, when you follow those breadcrumbs, it's supposed to be about aggravated felonies, right? But then when you read that law at the federal level, you will find that that law, under aggravated felonies, includes things like shoplifting. And I don't know about you, but I do not define stealing bread or deodorant or baby formula as an aggravated felony. But that is the case under this statute that is referenced in the Trust Act. That under aggravated felonies, RICO cases, RICO or conspiracy cases at the federal level that could be used and are currently trying to be used by our current administration against social movement organizers, organizing against the administration's policies. And depending on how the current DEA wants to define drug trafficking, we also might have a problem here in Massachusetts because marijuana production, sale, and possession is still illegal under federal law. So could they go after a delivery driver of perfectly legal in Massachusetts consumer marijuana products? Yeah, probably. They could try. Because it's under the law as an aggravated felony, which our law enforcement is allowed to cooperate with. Is that what we really want? I don't want that. And so I would say the act could be strengthened to be a little bit more explicit about what specific aggravated felonies under immigration law actually apply. The last thing I would say about the text of the law, another aspect to consider strengthening, there are two major groups of people that are being targeted under our current administration right now. Immigrants of all status. If you are an immigrant, whether you are with or without papers, whether you are TPS, whether you are U.S. citizens, because there is currently efforts to strip citizenship amongst certain people. Those are number one. The other, that's 1A. 1B are transgender folks. So one thing for the council to consider, whether it's in this act or in a separate act, is incorporating other groups of folks who are currently being targeted for having their rights stripped from them. That would be another thing to consider to strengthen. And in terms of implementation, again, I would imagine other city employees might not understand where their obligations are under this act. So as you review the act, questions that you might want to ask, is there any regular professional development done so that city staff know what their obligations are? Do other, and this is particularly, I think, important for our schools and other people with access to sensitive information, because I'm not sure that they do. And so I think that that's something that could be could help with strengthening the act itself. I also, going back to, as my last comment, to how you and I first met that first time, as you are looking at the implementation, particularly on the law enforcement side, I would encourage you all to ask questions about the decision-making process around sharing information, but in particular, not just how do we decide what information gets to be shared and how that information gets shared. It should also involve looking into how do you determine the information that you're sharing. Thinking about that young man who was they tried to deport. There was actually 3 attempts, 3 individuals who were they attempted to deport. We were able to prevent 1 deportation. In every single case, a BPS individual, resource officer, determined, for some reason, was never articulated why, that those young men, they were all young boys, those children were gang members. How did they come to that decision? How did they determine that? You know, so I think, and let's also remember, there was also the incident in which a BPD officer conspired with a local contractor to help him avoid his legal, under the law, workers' comp obligations by having one of his workers picked up by ICE. And that happened with the assistance of BPD. So as we think about not just how information gets shared, but how does that information get created, those are things that I think are worthy of exploration as you evaluate this law. And then I'll cede it to my panelists.
Well, you really touch on an important issue here, because it's like I said before, even the Trust Act is so much on just police work, but it has ripple effects on everything else the government, city government does. So in the case of schools, the secretary usually have a lot of information, but they are not trained. They are not trained how. And I feel that all the information, the only person that can answer anything from external thing is the principal of individual schools. And the leaders absolutely have to be trained to understand what the current law is and the right way. Because we throw a lot at our school leaders, and not everybody has the same understanding. Even you can ask any school leader, I can bet you more than 50% of them would not know what it is in it. I did know when at one time there was a lot of directives come down school leaders that absolutely to how we should protect homeless students. So as soon as a student assigned to the school, as soon as I look at the address, I knew which one. And I had to instruct the secretary and everybody else that have contact that you don't do X, Y, and Z. So the leader is the one that has to really know. You almost sometimes have to act like a lawyer. And I usually resent that because I'm not a lawyer and I should not have to know. But right now, we do. We do, to protect our students and our parents and our teachers. And I often, when people come and charge in the schools and say, you know so-and-so does not live in your district, I'm looking at them and saying, I'm not the police. I serve all students who come to the school, and that's my job. So everybody needs to be trained of how in the law, and I do agree to having that very specific in the Trust Act to cover other things that would help ease our educators' anxiety so that they can really, really focus on teaching and learning. Because right now they are bombarded. I can tell you that I could not have a full night of sleep the 35 years I was working. And I didn't understand where some of my symptoms come from. It's come from that stress. It's worrying about, am I going to give the wrong thing? What I'm doing to protect the children and the teachers that's under my care. That's a heavy, very heavy responsibility. And what we can do as a city to give our leaders tools, clear guidelines, and how they can protect themselves and the students. And we can all be better. And one of the reasons why those what are they called, safety officers in the school, we have a lot of folks are well-meaning, but they really don't know. They really don't know their power, or sometimes they do know and they want to expand that power, but it's not for them to decide, right? So the school leaders and the superintendent has to be very tight on those things. And things has been too loosey-goosey for a long time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you have one?
I think this is Michelle Etienne Campbell, Pastor Campbell. Just answering the question that Congresswoman Mejia asked me regarding church and faith institutions and how we can partner. I think it's important we understand that Boston is a sanctuary city, but churches are actual sanctuaries where people and communities and families come in order for them to really find peace and solace and to be able to worship freely. And I think one of the things that is troubling, particularly in this political climate, is the understanding that sanctuaries are no longer sacred, and that under this administration, the threat of ICE being able to enter into a church during worship service and just pull people out can be very daunting. And so, our hope is that we can return to a point or a perspective where the church and the sanctuary is actually a sacred place, where it is separate from all the political and the unrest that we are seeing in our communities. The church, on the other hand, also plays multiple roles. In addition to playing the role, of supporting people from a spiritual perspective, we also have a responsibility to support our community from a social perspective as well. And particularly in the Black community, that has been what we have done for the entire existence of the church. We have always been, and in our community, have always provided our members of our churches with spiritual leadership, but also social leadership. We have attorneys in the church that we solicit to come and provide support. We educate the people in our church who are not accustomed to the American culture, don't speak the language, and need that additional support. We're there to support them in any way that we can. But with the laws and these regulations and everything changing so rapidly, sometimes it's difficult to provide accurate information to the people within our community. And so I think in ways that, that we could perhaps gain support from, the city council is with constant information being disseminated to the churches to help support, because we really are the frontline people that deal with not just, with the schools. The schools are the frontline people who deal with the children, but we're the frontline people who deal with families all together, moms, dads, kids. Everybody comes and everybody's looking for support. And the first place they're looking for support is from their spiritual leaders. And we need to be able to have the resources necessary, legal resources, financial resources, all types of support to be able to really, carry these families and help them throughout the course of this particular journey. And so if you were to ask me what can we do in terms of a collaborative way to move things forward, it would be to provide as much information, education, and those type of resources to help us stay on top. Because as the last panelist says, we're not attorneys, we're religious leaders, but yet we're having to play the role of an attorney, we're having to play the role of teachers, we're having to play the role of the, catch-all for the community, and we do it gladly, and we do it the best we can, but if there are ways for us to do it even better, we want to be able to support that. And so, our prayer is that, the people will not be afraid to come to church. Our prayer is that we'll be able to have spaces that are, again, sacred, that we are not afraid or even in the church, we don't have to have, the pastor running up and saying, or the bishop running up and saying, if ICE comes into this door, we're going to lock everybody in and nobody's going to leave the room. I mean, that shouldn't be the conversation that we have on a Sunday morning. And yet, unfortunately, that is also the conversation that we're having, that, we're going to be staying in and we will close people in. At the end of the day, it's important for everyone to understand that whether a person is an immigrant or not, everybody wants safety. I heard a couple of callers who were against, these acts and are against these sanctuary cities. And we all want to be safe in our community. And it's even more difficult when you're feeling like the people who are perpetrating the ill will towards you are folks who are supposed to be protecting you and not people who are supposed to be harming you. And so it's a blurred line as to who are we leaning on for protection and who are we looking towards who are the people who are against us. And as an immigrant in an immigrant community, it's a very blurred line and it's a difficult way to live. And so that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
And I know, Nivea, I'm so sorry. My colleagues must be like, Councilor Mejia, I am occupying a lot of oxygen here today, but I want to be mindful. I know that Nivea is also online waiting to...
Cállate. Sorry. Oh my God. Sure. The question, when you mind rephrasing again the question?
Yes. So what we'd like to hear from you, Nivea, as a business owner, more specifically, I know you also work in the schools, but what should city leaders understand about the role immigrant-owned businesses play in Boston's economic ecosystem, and what policies will help you thrive in this political climate? So as a business owner, you mentioned earlier that, you have some folks who are working who are afraid. And so how can the city respond? What role can the city play, whether it's the Office of Small Businesses? Like, how can we be helpful?
I mean, it's not only our employees, it's also our customers. So we have seen a decrease on people coming into the restaurant. So that, creates a domino effect. Our waitresses are not gaining the same amount of money. And people, even though they still purchasing from the restaurant through our apps or takeouts, but it's not the same as when someone sits down and have a full meal with appetizer, meal, and a dessert, and perhaps a drink. So that is definitely affecting us. So policies, access to funding, and financial resources that we desperately need. Protecting, I don't know how we're going to protect our immigrants from all of this. I mean, it's like this, it's terrible what is happening. Perhaps offering more job trainings. So to people, legal support, access to legal support in their own languages is very important, and how to navigate the system. And in terms of education, is the support of our families to be welcome in our schools and make sure that that's a safe place, not only for their children, but also for them. So those are my 2 cents on this. I wish I have more in depth. I don't know much about the law and how can we change things in the act, but I love what the lawyer before said. It's things like that, like be more detailed in what we're doing and how we can improve the first act.
Gracias, thank you.
Angela. I'll go ahead and answer your question, Julia. As like many of us were saying, the Trust Act has a ripple effect on many cases in Boston. One of them has to do with women. And so at Centro Presente, we do a lot of work with women, specifically Central American women who have fled their countries of origin due to violence. But I think a conversation that we've had at Centro Presente is that violence doesn't only happen in our countries of origin, but also in our own backyards. And so there's this fear that we've heard a lot about whether women are going to be afraid of calling 911 because of the fear of being deported if there is domestic violence in their homes. So that's an aspect that we've been talking about. But recently in these past days, we've had an influx of people, specifically women, coming in asking questions about their rights, whether it is safe for them to drop their kids off at school, questions about if they're safe at work, who has their information, stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's what we've been hearing at Centro Presente, and I think it's just a lot of rumors. We've been getting calls daily about like rumors that they've heard, if they're true, and I think something the city of Boston could do is just doing like reassuring the community of what's going on with the Trust Act, and yeah, because I feel like there's a lot of confusion, and yeah.
I won't talk for the rest of the hearing.
All right, now, thank you, Councilor Mejia, and really appreciate those thoughtful answers from our panelists. I'm now going to pass it over to Council President Liu Jen. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I feel like in Councilor Mejia's questions, a lot came out, and I appreciate you all for offering testimony. Dr. Estrella Luna, of course, is in lead for the work that you do on behalf of all of our immigrant communities. Angela, the work that you do and your father around both, not just the Trust Act, but for our TPS holders and for so many. And Pastor Etienne Campbell, I think you summarized it. A lot of our churches are front lines for communities feeling safe. And so my questions are really about, do you believe that there's an understanding in the immigrant community of what the Trust Act is, which is simply that, you know, that the Boston Police Department will not be will not be the ones enforcing any federal immigration law or any federal civil detainer? Is that generally understood in the communities, in the immigrant communities that you're a part of? Because I do think that there is a lot of confusion, but I want to know if that is understood. The Haitian community, I'm not fully sure, so I would love for there to be an understanding, like, do people understand that? And then the second question is, because churches, community organizations are the informal institutions that people trust, what are suggestions for the city to get out that, like, the accurate information? A lot of our immigrant communities use WhatsApp or use, you know, or on TikTok. Like, what are the ways in which we can be either supporting or funding or getting out messages to communities in ways that they will, that will penetrate immigrant communities that are oftentimes, particularly people who are not really connected to government and institutions? So if anyone has a comment on either of those two.
I do.
So I'm surprised she's in.
No, because I work in cross communities in a lot of spaces. And I would say the general consensus is that most people, if they're not a consistent attender that comes to church, that goes to church or to community organizations, they do not know. Most people, ordinary folks in the community, they do not know about the Trust Act. So having something like even a very simple fact sheet, not something fancy, but simple, to explain exactly with a seal on it, with a city seal on it, to make it, it's a legal, it's not just a flyer somebody created, but it's something legal from the city that can be disseminated in all city departments, websites, needs to go out. That. Even for all the, particularly if you can go down to all the city employees on all levels, oftentimes they're the first one to see folks, right? I'll bet you most people don't know.
Thank you.
I also want to build on. I also want to build on your point. I feel like right now in the Latino community, they also do not know. I think right now at the moment, with so much fear, they see someone in any type of suit and they feel afraid. So they don't really understand the difference between the Boston Police Department right now at the moment and ICE. And so it's just that, like, that fear that's in our communities right now. And yeah, a statement like that would teach a lot to like the Latino community and immigrant communities in Boston.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
I would just,
Go ahead, Pastor.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I would just add, from the Haitian community, I know in our church, and you know, Council President Lujan, you've been to my church, and so has Councilwoman Mejia. You guys have been to the church. This is not something that anybody really understands. The Trust Act is not something that anybody really knows. It's just, all they know is that that when they see a police officer come in, they're afraid that this is somebody who's going to deport. That's all that they're thinking about. I think the way to support that is, you know, yes, providing information to the leadership of the church, but also it's great to have people within the community or people in the city council to come to the churches, like you guys have come to my church before, and just having the floor and kind of doing a kind of a road trip where you're going on Sundays to various churches, to immigrant churches, to provide that information, even if it's for 5-10 minutes, to stand up and say, I'm here on behalf of the city council to let you guys know this is what you can expect, you know, and you don't need to be afraid of this and don't need to be afraid of that, but this is what we need to do if something were to take place. But the truth of the matter is that even with that, there is general fear for the police, because at the end of the day, black and brown people get pulled over, and sometimes there are false narratives that are attached to folks who are not doing anything illegal or who are not criminals. And so they hear these stories, and it really does play with their emotions, and it plays with the psyche. And so I don't know, other than I think that would be a huge piece, is kind of doing you know, scheduling a road trip where various city council people from various districts will go to immigrant churches and have these conversations, stand up, visit for a few minutes and say, this is what you can expect, this is what you can expect. I think that's going to would be a great support. Yes, they hear it from the pastors. I personally talk about it on a regular basis. You know, I am grateful for the people at Mira, because I populate the information about Mira all the time and tell them to go to the website for updated information. It's in all languages. You know, I do the spiel, but that doesn't mean that people aren't afraid. I think if they see somebody who is actually somebody in the city council or in government coming in to say, you don't need to be afraid, we're here to support you, that goes a long way.
Thank you. And I just want to say to Angela's point about domestic violence, that's one of my biggest concerns, is that because they think one officer is the same, and you see it's happened before, in rises in domestic violence with more people staying at home, with people less likely to call the police when immigrants are now more likely to call the police. And so I think that this is really good feedback, and I want to say thank you.
I would just like to piggyback and add one thing that hasn't been said yet, because I 100% agree with all of this. Those of us who are working on the ground with our folks, and even hearing the pastor mention like legal support, resources for legal support is absolutely essential right now. Yeah. Even just to answer basic questions, just to answer people's basic questions. Yeah. That actually would be an enormous amount of support. And so if in the budget process, the more money can be funneled to Moya, who already has a process for providing funding for legal support for immigrants, that actually would be huge, because we rely on even me as doing what a lot of folks here already do also, you know, just trying to deal with the rumors about what can and can't happen, you know. Oh, yeah, I have a PhD in law, but I can't be available to everybody 24/7. I do have to sleep, and I have cats, I have a husband, I got to do all the things that humans have to do. So how can we get more people who have the kind of legal training to provide that, just to answer questions? That actually would be huge.
And we've been putting in that budget request for the past years, and we're doing it. The Moya does a great job, but the consultation every other Wednesday with the lawyers are 15 minutes. It's too short for our immigrant community. So thank you for elevating that, and we're working on it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Council President. I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Pepin. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all so much for your amazing testimonies and earlier today. I really admire all the work you all do, and I'm a huge follower. Suzanne, you bring up such a great point about the children really being kind of a big group of people that are usually thought about when it comes to this, but obviously feel the impact. My question is, how do you think that we can better strengthen the Trust Act to really talk about the children and what this impact, how may it impact them?
Well, I think, Luna, you mentioned that to be really clear what exactly the Trust Act can cover. And is there something that you can add to that that would give direction how schools should conduct themselves? And that would get down to the school level, the secretaries, even the other clerical, lunch monitors. I don't know how many fights I have with lunch monitors because they think they work in the school and they know everything, but they don't. They often give false information. So even if you've written it into an act, it doesn't do anything unless we implement it in the way that you penetrate it all the way down to everyday folks.
Do you think that there's enough information coming from BPS about what rights everyone has? I had a good conversation with Superintendent Skipper about this not too long ago because one of the schools in my district, the Matahunt, is really going through a lot of issues where parents, rightfully so, are just scared to send their kids to school. Do you think there's enough collaboration between central office, between even us, the city government, to the schools to make sure that you all have the right information at your disposal?
I think, well, it's like everything else. You get a piece of paper or you get a directive. So how far does that go? There really has to be some intentional talk, intentional discussion within whenever they have all the school leaders together. I remember when public safety, right after 9/11, we spent enormous amount of time for school leaders to understand how do we protect. And all of a sudden, all the doors are locked, and you become having this space that nobody can come in. It sends a frightening message to our kids. Yeah. But how do you actually do that work in a way that make them safe? So that takes intentional discussion and time. Right now, I don't think it's that kind of intentional.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to say, because we had parents come to our staff at Mutual Aid East in East Boston with the letters that came out from Superintendent Skipper. Yeah. And what is, I think, difficult about that is it's a letter that I can understand and I can read, and I can read between the lines because it's my job to do that. But if you're a regular parent, you wouldn't necessarily be able to see what they're necessarily saying. So the communication has been there, except that I don't know, it's not clear to me, either to the parents or to the staff, what that actually means in action. And so I think it's completely legitimate for a parent who's like, does this mean that you're not going to let my kid be taken? Right. Because that's not, the letter doesn't state that. Right? And so those are that kind of clarity using language that I, as a member of my community, my comadres over here at Centro Presente, that we can tell our community, this is what you have an entitlement to, this is what you have a right to. That hasn't been made clear. So I can't say anything other than what the law says, and we can't really rely on federal law right now.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's something that I've been realizing that there's kind of a lack of clear communication with residents. I was at a barbershop this past Friday talking to the owner of the barbershop and the clients, and it was really sad because after I got the haircut, they sat me down and they were like, so what's actually going to happen? What rights do we have? And it turned into an hour extra session for me trying to break down what is the Boston Trust Act and what does this mean. So I think that I'm going to call on my colleagues who agree with the Boston Trust Act for us to kind of translate that in a better way to our colleagues. I love the idea from one of the panelists about going directly to the churches, going directly to the different places, going to the schools potentially to have these discussions, because I think that there's a lot of confusion. I think that some clear messaging would be better. I know that my time is coming up, so what I want to say to wrap up for me is just thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you for continuing to advocate for our communities. Thank you for being so brave as well. I truly do appreciate it. So thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Pepin. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here, for the work you're doing, for the informative information you provided us. I want to also acknowledge Suzanne Lee for your incredible leadership as an educator in Boston for so many years. Mr. Chair, I want to be respectful to all of my colleagues, but may I ask you a question?
Yes.
And some of my questions would be to the panel, but also to the Boston Police if they were here. But was the Boston Police invited?
I think my office collaborated with Councilor Mejia's office, the lead sponsor on this. I think the idea was to try to just, our goal was to hear our community and to hear from the people on the ground. So they did not receive an official invitation from the committee.
Okay. Some of the comments that I heard from the panel relating to information sharing or clear communication with Boston residents, I agree with. What is the process of city officials, whether it's the Boston Police, whether it's city councilors, whether it's the mayor's office, but what is the process or data that we share with residents in a formal way? But that hasn't happened, I believe, has it, Mr. Chair?
I do not believe so, but I'm happy to, as chair, get your questions into the record and submit them to the administration on your behalf, Councilor Flynn.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I also, as Councilor Pepin mentioned, residents want to hear clear communication about what is going to take place. But maybe my question would be to Suzanne Lee. Suzanne, is there any type of official policy from the Boston Public School System if immigration officials do come to the school? Do they have written instructions that what they can do and what they can't do, I guess?
I don't know if they're implementing anything. From what I know of all education institutions, including public schools, it was advised that no school leaders can ever talk to X, Y, and Z, like the media, the police, on anything. Just that the central office has a legal team would take all questions. So it's for the school leader to refer everything to central office. How that is being implemented, is this working? I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. I do think, and again, I want to be respectful and I don't want to be disagreeable with anyone, but I do think it is important, in my opinion only, for us to have a conversation with the Boston Police, with the state police, and with federal officials, at least to understand what is taking place, what they expect from residents, what they are going to do, what their plan is, if the federal plan is different from a city plan, or if a city plan is different from a state plan, how all three, city, state, and federal, work together or do not work together. But I would like to hear about everyone's plan. I think that would inform us as a city. It would inform residents to know exactly what each person or each department or each agency will do as it relates to the Trust Act or Sanctuary City, because I don't have a clear understanding of the Trust Act. I don't have a clear understanding of Sanctuary City, what it does do, what it doesn't do, what impact it has, how it impacts residents, how it impacts undocumented residents. But I do think as part of those questions, I do think we have to have a conversation, as difficult as it may be, with Boston Police, with the state police, and with federal officials. I don't know. Do you agree with that, or again, want to be respectful? But I want to be respectful, but I don't want to put anyone on the spot either.
Well, I always felt, if I'm okay to chime in here, that even the way that the Trust Act is written is all about police, right?
Yeah.
Law enforcement.
The details that are in the Trust Act are all about law enforcement. And to that point, the City Council should, according to Section C in the Trust Act, the City Council is supposed to receive an annual report from BPD around, and it lists 4 different things that BPD is supposed to report to you all on an annual basis. Whether or not, I mean, it's an interesting question about whether or not you've received it, whether you've, whether those reports are clear and give you the information that you need. I think that's, if you are not getting that, that's a question that I think is definitely worthy of exploration. If the information in those reports are insufficient, that is another question that I think is worthy of exploration.
I was going to mention that because so much of that we tend to do things in isolation, and so one side does not know what the other one's doing. But when in cases like this, in this time, the more collaboration and bringing together of different departments, different pieces like the school and the police and other, how we to understand what the Trust Act is, can be very helpful. I don't know what authority or how you get that done. Like you say, you don't even know exactly how the Trust Act work, right? I certainly don't. So we depend, if the public, if you want the public to feel more secure, more safe, then we have to go beyond what's written in that piece of paper and bring the different pieces together so that people can see it and hear it.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, can I say something really quick?
Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
And I want to just thank my colleague for his questions. And just so you know, this is the hearing docket that I filed, and we're going to have a series of hearings on this particular docket. So I wanted to switch things up and lead with community so that we can understand what the policy-making process needs to look like, and that is really leaning into folks who are navigating healthcare, faith-based, our education system, our businesses, our residents, like our nonprofit leaders, so that the tone of this hearing has been modified slightly, because when we're looking to evaluate, we really believe that centering people who are living the realities and or doing the work are the frontline folks who can help ground us in what that work needs to look like, Councilor Flynn, so that when we do bring in Boston Police Department, when we bring in the Boston Public Schools, and I'm also going to ask for the Boston Public Health Commission to be here because there's access to, health care. And I'm also going to ask to invite the Chief of Economic Opportunity into this chamber, because this collaborative conversation needs everyone at the table. So there will be many opportunities in the history of this particular hearing order. It's not going to end with just today's hearing. So there will be opportunities, and the questions that you're asking will definitely be engaging city officials on that journey so that we can all get clear about what this moment means. But in order for us to get clear with what this moment means, we have to understand that the Trust Act is very specific to one area of government that we have control over. But there's a lot of other spaces and places that are not included within the Act where we are seeing impact for folks who are not going to church, who are not calling when they feel unsafe at home, when they're not going to school, and they're not going to work. And all of those things are going to trickle down to the impact that we as a city, when our budget comes down, that we're going to have to talk about those things. So this is a timely conversation, and there will be more hearings so that we can unpack some of the questions that you've asked. So does that feel fair to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you for your response, Councilman Mejia. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Fitzgerald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, panel, for what was a very educational hearing today. I think I understand at least some of the more complexities of the Trust Act, the deeper, even referencing the different articles within and what they mean at the federal level, and understanding those complexities. I think that's what's going to help folks understand what the real purpose of this act is. That being said, I do agree with my friend, Councilor Flynn, in that when I was putting most of my questions together for today's hearing, it was around the collaboration with public safety, as we thought that was sort of the real crux of where some of the, or should I say, that's where some of the friction is, right? So I'm going to switch it up a little, and sort of with this, with the brain power that we have on today's panel, and ask you all, sort of even higher than the Trust Act, right? What are some things that policies, advice, ideas, procedures, processes, if you will, that you think would help immigration run better, right? Because I know we've heard some other issues of, and there are some fears that folks have of this. Some are unfounded, some may be better founded. And to address folks like that, where is, help us sort of find a way that you think, hey, this is a more appropriate avenue to do this, but still be effective in carrying out other segments of law enforcement and other activities, if you will. And again, don't want to put anyone on the spot. I mean, that's sort of a big question, but again, I think with this panel, I think it might be helpful to just say, here are some ideas that might work better in the constituency. And interested to hear those as well, because I'd be lying if I said immigration, when you're running for city council, immigration is not where you say, okay, I've got to really hunker down and study the details here. It's more, right, the city services and things of that nature. But this is becoming a city service topic, really. And so look to you all to sort of educate me, please, and thank you.
Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Pastor Campbell, Etienne Campbell again. I think I appreciate your question. And the main thing that comes to my mind, based on the individuals that we work with and within our community, is unfortunately people who are seen as immigrants are being demonized as criminals. And just because most people are not, or these individuals are not born in this country and they have immigrated from another country to this country, doesn't make them a criminal. But it's automatically seen that if there's a crime that's happening in the community, it's an immigrant person. It's a situation, it's an immigrant person. We also want to make sure that individuals who are committing crimes are held accountable for the crimes that they commit. But if the crime is moving from one country because of unrest to another country, coming here, is that the crime? I don't think that's what we're looking at here. And I think it's important for us to kind of really streamline and identify that ICE or this administration is going after criminals, people who are committing real crime, and we're not just looking at somebody who's black and brown or who has an accent and saying that they are the criminal. And we have to find a way to make it so that, immigration is not synonymous with criminality. I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle to go over. And once we can get over that hurdle, and we can understand that people who are immigrants are also people who are raising their family, who are hard workers, who are spiritual, who are intellectuals as well. And they're not just, people who have no education. That's not the truth. These are intellectuals. These are people who are educated. These are people who are Christian. These are people who are spiritual, and people who are raising their families well. And we're not equating that to criminalization. That's going to be a big hurdle. And then from there, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Pastor.
If I may just offer, what you were talking about, I appreciate you raising that question, but as a city, we need to, and as leaders, we often have to think about how we talk and what we emphasize out in public can help change mindset. Because a lot of what people are hearing is that divisiveness. And like you said, anybody who's an immigrant must be, particularly if you're dark skinned, you must be a criminal. That kind of thing doesn't cost you money to deal with that, but it does take a lot of energy and a lot of intentional on our part, on everybody's part, to help change those mindsets. And it's not necessary, it's not something that you say have a policy that can deal with it, but it's among all of us as leaders. How do we even interact with each other? How do we even talk to our neighbors and in public? Those can go a long way. And stop politicizing things that make things worse. So I think all of us have a role in that.
Thank you.
I have a different view, slightly. I don't disagree. And also, I guess I would add, I would invite you to take up the opportunity that's in the Trust Act, which is to reaffirm that the city of Boston, this city, is not an agent of the federal government. It is not our responsibility, nor is it our role, to enforce federal civil laws. Because if we were to do that, then we would have to justify why would we choose only this subset of federal civil laws? Why aren't we also then enforcing SEC violations? Why wouldn't we be enforcing violations of the Spam Act, both of which have much greater impacts on the lives of our residents than immigration, civil violence, than unlawful entry might? So I would encourage the city of Boston to embrace the idea that we are not agents of the federal government and that our services should not be determined by the whims and the vagaries of people that we often don't have control over, because this is such a large country and so much of this country is gerrymandered in ways that we don't have any influence on what the federal government does or does not do. So if the city wants to do something around immigration specifically, understand and reinforce that immigrants, people who are here in this country, whether or not they are foreign-born or the children of foreign-born peoples, have rights. Help us ensure or strengthen people's rights. That's what the personal liberty law did in 1855, is it put due process protections to and self-emancipated Black people in order to prevent this state and this city from being complicit in an immoral act. Immigrants have rights, and what the city should do is focus less on the rhetoric of what's going on nationally and more on how do we ensure that people know their rights and how do we strengthen the rights that they have.
Excellent. I don't know if there's any other comment, but I know my time is up, Chair, so I appreciate it. Just want to again say thank you very much for the education from a historical perspective, from a culture, from a current events perspective, and again helps us. You know your history and you know your current events, you can find out where you're going. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald. Also, I'm so sorry, Councilor Braden. I failed to acknowledge you earlier. You've been here for a long time, but we've been joined by Councilor Braden, and did not mention that earlier. I'm going to go to Councilor Weber, and then I'll go to Councilor Braden for your line of questions. So, Councilor Weber, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I guess a couple comments. I think for Suzanne, I believe BPS, the school leaders were sent a memo similar to in other cities that explains what to do when ICE comes to the door, and that the basic answer is,
do not let them in without a judicially signed warrant, and that even when they do produce a warrant, have it reviewed by someone in the legal department. I mean, I was encouraged by that when I saw the memo, a month ago. I guess we'll see what happens. Another thing is, in terms of the reports, Dr. Estrella Luna, we believe we got that report last year. I think we have them for almost all but 2 years from 2015 to today. There was a couple COVID, 2019, 2020. And so one thing, I've read all the cases and looked at everything. I mean, the Boston Trust Act, I believe we're sort of, I think Kevin talked about the anti-commandeering doctrine. We don't allow our law enforcement or any other resources to be commandeered by the federal government. So, and used in this way, but I don't want to oversell the Trust Act to the community. I mean, all we can do is say, if you see a Boston police officer, that person is not an immigration agent. They're not going to assist in something that's going to result in your removal or the removal of your family. That, we can't stop the federal government, an ICE agent, from doing exactly that. So in terms of like what we do that's effective, I was interested in a few things. One is Ms. Palma, we talked, at least in the community and MIRA, we talk about Know Your Rights trainings. And that to me is something, okay, that's something we can do, that we have red cards. If Moya's listening, we need them in Spanish. I think they ran out, obviously. Can you just talk a little bit about has that been effective? Is it something, we need to do more of?
Yeah, so when it comes to Know Your Rights trainings, it's not anything new. That we've been doing it for years. Past administrations, we've always been having Know Your Rights trainings. We've just been amplifying the amount of Know Your Rights trainings. We've been having the amount of red cards we're distributing. And Centro Presente actually has their own little booklet in Spanish as well, if you guys are interested. But yeah, it's definitely something that has been helpful in the community, especially with the conversations of the Trust Act. And I know that the city of Boston has also had a lot of information when it comes to Know Your Rights, so it's been pretty helpful.
Well, it's also the issue that, if somebody has legitimate fear about what's going on, they're not going to go to a Know Your Rights training. So we've just been dropping flyers and red cards in places without going up to people and saying, here, you might need this. So do you have any advice in terms of how to reach people who need to get the word, and not just, if they're not going to, there's a flyer saying come to the First Baptist Church for, JP for Know Your Rights training. If you're concerned about what would happen to you or your family, you might not show up.
What we have done is for everybody who comes to a workshop or a meeting, for them to take a few more to distribute to their friends or neighbors, whoever they see. So, like I said before, people who do come to meetings or come to gatherings, they know. But it's all everybody else out there that haven't come don't know. So one way is for the people who attended to outreach to other people.
Okay, and Dr. Estrella, so in terms of what you said in terms of how to strengthen the Trust Act and look at different things, I think we need to look at funds for legal resources and make sure those, if Moya's channeling those funds, that's great. But we just passed a resolution in support of state law, which is looking to set up those programs statewide. I think we can act much quicker than the state can. So I'm a big supporter of that. I guess if you had any comment about those programs in addition, or what we can do as a city. Another thing is you mentioned extending the Trust Act to not just people who are currently undocumented. My concern is TPS. It's like people are here legally and we're trying to make them undocumented by changing the law, which is just, when we talk about birthright citizenship and all this other stuff, we're talking about people here who have status. I think that's an interesting idea for the Trust Act to try to cover people who might be, if we're talking about somebody who, is here under a TPS, and there's something, I don't know if you, those two things, if you have any comments.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is very important, because the reality of being either a foreign-born person or the child of a foreign-born person is that your status is always insecure. That even having a green card doesn't actually make you 100% secure, as a Palestinian activist learned yesterday in New York City. But even, and I was in a personal family case when I was helping a family member with their citizenship paperwork, and this was a person who had been in this country for 40 years, and it was never going to be a problem, but they had lost their green card. And not having possession of your green card puts you in a lot of insecurity. So everybody who is themselves an immigrant or the child of an immigrant is potentially at risk under the current language and rhetoric that's coming out of the federal administration. So this is why we emphasize what can we do at the city level so that the city is strengthening people's rights as they exist here in the city, and strengthening the rights that they know about. Moya has always been, honestly, an amazing partner, and I can tell you as a researcher, the one city department that we always hear people trust is Moya. Everybody trusts Moya. I don't know anybody who has any relationship with Moya who does not trust Moya. I don't hear about this with any other city department. You see variation in trust of the school department or the parks or environment. Everybody trusts Moya. So more resources to Moya, because they are so tightly in collaboration and in communication with the immigrant community, is actually where you're going to get the best guidance on how can they support us, because exactly what Suzanne and my comadre here from Centro Presente is talking about is what we do at the community level is we get the information out there to be spread by others. We don't necessarily, so we have the meetings, we have the sessions, we have the charlas, but then to use a law enforcement term, we deputize our neighbors. Go and now talk to your family. Go talk to your neighbor. Go talk to your church group who is getting together even if they're not going to the church anymore. So that's the way that you strengthen and the empowerment that people have at the grassroots level, that if it's matched at the city level with a commitment and a stand on the rights of people who are immigrants and other folks who are targeted, then we are going to be stronger and safer as a city.
Okay, I just have one quick follow-up. So, one of the concerns, I think, for me anyway, was, we have the Trust Act, but people following the Trust Act have been threatened with, criminal prosecution by the White House. And, and I was worried about, our police commissioner, whatever, people being coerced into not following our rules, but following, this. And so I know Somerville and Chelsea, they filed a lawsuit in federal court here to overturn the policies the federal policies. And I know Boston hasn't joined that. Do you have any thoughts on that lawsuit and, what we can do?
I'm happy that there's a lawsuit. I actually said to a colleague of mine this morning that, so number one, executive orders are not law. That is something that's very important to keep reinforcing. Executive orders are not law, and yet at the same time, we have to challenge those laws in court. And the minute we stop challenging those laws in court is the minute that we lose to those unlawful actions. It'd be great if the city of Boston was able to participate in that litigation, but I don't know who makes those decisions here. But I do think, and I'm concerned about, let's say, for example, the Trust Act is strengthened and made explicit that public school employees are empowered to not cooperate with federal law enforcement. Should federal law enforcement do something unlawful, like arrest a school secretary for refusing to let them in the school, right? What will the city of Boston do to ensure that that person is supported? Will we provide legal support to them while they are detained by federal immigration or federal officials? What are we going to do to make our own city staff, that could potentially include our police officers, know that when they enforce the Trust Act, that the city has their back. And so I think as we think about strengthening the Trust Act, that's another way that we can go about doing that, because to the extent that there's a possibility that these things can escalate, I would encourage you to be very creative in thinking through how it can escalate and then what the city can do in response, particularly so that people feel less pressure to comply, particularly comply in advance.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Braden, but I do just want to recognize that we have Dr. Frini Polanco-Walters with us virtually, who is a healthcare professional. I know they were supposed to be part of our second panel, but we're just going to have everyone be part of this discussion. So just wanted to welcome Dr. Frini Polanco-Walters, if you're with us on virtually.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I really appreciate you being here. Councilor Braden, you have the floor, and you can ask questions to any of our panelists here.
Thank you. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a healthcare professional before I was had this job, and it's very timely. Dr. Polanco-Walters, I had a question just about access to healthcare. I know we talked a lot about schools and the intersection with the law enforcement in the city, our own police department, etc. I attend a community health centre a lot. I know many of us do. A lot of our immigrant community attend. That's where they get their health care. I did hear from my health centre that a lot of immigrants are afraid to go for health care, and that and I think my particular health centre is trying to expand their ability to do telehealth. But I do think it's really, especially in this moment in time when we're thinking about measles epidemic and potentially bird flu and all sorts of epidemic diseases, infectious diseases coming our way, that we have folks in our communities who are afraid to go to see a doctor or to seek health care. So I'd love to maybe hear Dr. Polanco-Walters' opinion or any thoughts on the issue.
Yeah, of course, Councilor. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. First, I just wanted to thank you so much, the members of the Boston City Council Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee, for inviting me to this hearing. Like you mentioned, my name is Dr. Polanco. I'm a pediatrician specializing in adolescent and young adult medicine, as well as the medical director of a clinic serving families here in Boston, a community health center as well. And I stand before you today not only as a physician, but also as a proud immigrant from Dominican Republic who came to this great city about 30 years ago. I was, raised in a really hardworking family that instilled in me the values of perseverance, education, and service. And I am a product of Boston Public Schools, and today I have the privilege of giving back to the very community that shaped me. And yes, I am in agreement, because we are seeing, me and my colleagues are seeing the same things that you mentioned, which is people, families are not coming to seek the care that they need, and that sometimes they urgently need because of fear. It's a devastating impact that our community is going to have, because the health and that community depends on the health and well-being of these patients and their families. And the fear is preventing them from bringing a sick child. It's preventing pregnant women from seeking prenatal care. And it's a fear that's forcing many individuals to delay treatment for chronic conditions like hypertension and diabetes until they reach a crisis point. And the fear is not theoretical. I'm so glad you mentioned that your community health center is seeing that as well, because it is real and it is harming our community. As you know, Boston is known for the world-class healthcare institutions, But what good are the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, or the most cutting edge medical research if the people who need the care are too afraid to walk through our doors? I care for children whose families are already struggling with barriers to health care. So we talk about cost, language, transportation, right? But now the greatest and most damaging barrier is the fear. And fear that stepping into a clinic or a hospital could put them or their loved ones at risk of detention and deportation. You know, I have seen firsthand in my clinic, we have had families lower their voices to whisper and ask, "Doctor, will I be safe here?" And I have seen families ration the health care, choosing to forgo care until their child is dangerously ill because they're terrified of what might happen if they step into a hospital or clinics. Some of my patients have been carrying legal documentation on them all the time, fearing that they may need to prove their right to exist at a moment's notice. And you and I both know how costly and complicated it can be to replace lost documents if they were to lose those documents. So this climate of fear doesn't just harm individual patients, it weakens the health of our entire city, because delayed treatment leads to more severe illness, higher healthcare costs. A lot of times when you let something that's very acute go into a chronic or gets worse, it ends up being receiving healthcare in the emergency room, which, as many of you know, is significantly much more expensive than coming to a clinic. And also preventable emergencies. So when infectious diseases go untreated, someone mentioned the measles epidemic that's going on in Texas, they don't stop at immigration status. They spread everywhere. Again, mental health has been something that we've been seeing since the pandemic, before the pandemic even, but as you know, since the pandemic, I've been suffering. Many of our patients and families struggling with mental health issues. When they're ignored due to fear, the consequences ripple through families and communities. In the end, public health depends on trust. And when people are afraid to seek care, that trust is broken. So policies like the Trust Act, when expanded to different areas, not only the police enforcement can help rebuild or build that trust. But to make it clear that healthcare facilities are places of healing, not enforcement, that one shouldn't have to choose between their health and their safety, and that in Boston, we value the dignity and well-being of every person, regardless of where they were born. So as a physician, my oath is to heal, protect, and to care for my patients. But I cannot do it if they're too afraid to come to me. The responsibility to create safe, just, and humane system does not solely rely on doctors and nurses. It also relies on the hands of you, policymakers. So I urge you to support the Trust Act, to expand it to places like healthcare institutions in the city, and to ensure that Boston remains a city where every person, regardless of their immigration status, can seek medical care without fear. This is not just a matter of policy, it's a matter of life and death. And again, I thank you so much for your time and commitment to public safety and justice. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. And I also, we had the unfortunate experience of having to support a family recently. The father, two kids in our schools, their dad was detained by ICE in Chelsea, even though he lives in Brighton, or he lived in Brighton, and the kids. So I did hear from folks close to the family that BPS did a good job in terms of supporting it was very sensitively handled, and the girls were supported very well. But the fact that you have two, they're now sort of unaccompanied minors, because I don't know what their father was taken out of state, so we don't know where. I think he was up in New Hampshire. I don't know if he's had a hearing yet, but I think that whole, can you imagine the stress of that on a young person if their parent is taken away? So I think there's huge mental health impacts, as the doctors just mentioned, in how families are separated like this. And I do think we need to know a lot more. I thought we had put this behind us, but from the last rodeo that we were in, but I feel that the aggressive nature of this, and just the the widespread profiling of people. If they look like they're an immigrant, they are immigrants, but if they look, just by looking like you come from another place, people are being accosted and detained and questioned. There's an incident in where was it? A German artist woman who was in detention in a private security detention center in, I think it's California or Colorado or somewhere. She's been there for 25 days. No representation, no due process. And she's a foreign national with a legal visa and passport and all the rest of it. There's sort of a lawlessness element to this that is very, very concerning, that if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're in deep trouble. So thank you all for your contributions this afternoon. I'm sorry I was late in arriving. I had other things to do, but I appreciate and I'm very, very pleased to hear that Moya is a trusted department in the city. We advocate strongly for help with English language classes, which is part of their remit, but I think their legal support is another very important part of what Moya does. And, it's budget season, so we'll have to see what we can do to make sure that they get more resources in this very, very difficult time, to see what they can do to help. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Now we're going to do a second round of questioning. Yep, she did. For anyone who does have him, Councillor Minute, do you have any other?
It's not so much a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think.
Councillor Mayor, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that Councillor Braden talked about the budget, right? Because the budget is our value statement, and especially in this moment, if the fairy godmother came down here with little magic wands, right? This is an opportunity for us to really think about how we utilize our political capital to really stand up for immigrants, right? And while I appreciate the idea that immigration is a federal issue, we are Boston, and our residents, despite whatever status they happen to be in, we serve them. And if they're not going to the Boston Public Health Commission or the community health centers, or they're not going to schools, then we are responsible for them despite their status. And so while I appreciate the whole idea of separating federal, politics from local politics, all of those things act with how our residents feel, right? And so with that, within that context, and Dr. Polanco, Walters, I'm glad that you are here, and I really do appreciate the racial equity lens around health access, particularly in this moment. And I know that Centro Presente did a lot of work around when, with community health centers and access to quality care for a lot of folks who were afraid or they weren't being treated correctly. All of those things exist simultaneously. And so I am curious, what areas, because I heard issues around dissemination of information and communication, but I'm just curious from the budget season with Moya, it's not just about enforcement and providing more dollars for legal services, but what else should we be thinking about that will help not only just strengthen the act, because that is going to be a whole separate conversation, but just help support those who are undocumented right now navigating city services.
There's one area that I would encourage the city to really invest some money in, which is in cybersecurity and the security of your data systems. These are, I can tell you what we are doing, me, my partners, across, not just in the immigration advocacy world, but in the climate advocacy world, in the civil rights world generally. We're Googling ourselves. We are trying to figure out what are the best and more secure email and messaging systems. We're trying to move as many, we are moving, for example, sensitive conversations off of WhatsApp. And so taking seriously cybersecurity with your systems and with your information systems, I think is one area that could definitely use a lot more attention. And you know, we do have cybersecurity laws here. Again, I would, when you think about investments in strengthening the ability of the city of Boston to focus on the city of Boston, right? Just remember that we might need to have our own laws that make explicit what people's rights are, and that's also going to take time and money to figure out also. So think about what we think we used to rely on the federal government for, and there may need to be some, you know, obviously more collaboration at the state level as well, but what can we do here in the city of Boston where we do not have to rely on federal law to protect our residents?
Like we don't have to pay taxes anymore.
You know,
that's
a whole other thing.
Watch that go viral. Dr. Polanco, I'm just curious, you know, in your new role, well, we're not going to talk about your new role, but you just access to quality health care in this moment. How can the city of Boston be a better partner in supporting our undocumented loved ones?
I think one area will be education. As you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there in the communities, and which is leading to the fear that I spoke about earlier. I think making sure that community health centers and either through the Boston Public Health Commission or however your office is fit, that the community health centers are getting trainings on how to address some of the fears, some of the questions that the community has, and making sure that whenever we make a promise to a community that we follow through, that the information that they're given, because they need to find trustworthy sources. So as long as we're giving information, disseminating that information through different centers, disseminating information through online, different avenues that impact the immigrant community, I think that's one. The other thing is making sure that, as you know, health is basically dependent on about 60% social determinants of health and 40% the care that we provide, right? So this week in my community health center, we usually have fresh trucks that bring food, and there was not that many people who came to get those services. And we do have a lot of patients that are food insecure. So using resources, thinking about what are the things that affect people's health, and going to those organizations to also disseminate this information. Obviously, there can be promises if a truck is parked in a parking lot and someone comes to the warrant. That's very different for someone who committed a crime. But the patients depend on housing, help with food, help with just so many things. Just today, there's a family that came that they were about to lose the energy and asking for support for a letter from us. So there's a lot of different strategies that you can develop, but I think starting with dissemination of information, accurate information that patients can trust, and communicating with the health centers to make sure that they're up to date with trainings. This information is changing, all the time. I'm not sure if you are aware, but there's now our patients brought to our attention that when you leave the United States and then you come back at passport control, when you are re-entering the U.S., there's a form that some people are being asked to fill out, and when they complete that form, apparently they revoke their green card holders. So kind of like, how are we going to educate people that if you come through, you cannot be signing anything. You have to be sure that you know what you're signing, and asking for time to get a lawyer, to talk to a lawyer before you sign anything. So things like that. As you know, we would love to be able to provide our patients with all that information, but we don't have time and we have to prioritize. So we have community health workers that can receive the training, and obviously those providers that want to get the training as well. So providing training, providing education, up-to-date education will be really helpful.
Got a lot of work to do. Is that true about the because I saw it on TikTok too, about the passport situation. Then you know how there's so many information. Like I saw that, but I wasn't sure if that is so. That is true that they are doing that. They're making you sign something, and that you can get your green card revoked.
I think
That-
that
oh,
it's
sorry.
something that we need to, so two things. When we hear these kinds of stories direct from people, as I'm hearing Dr. Polanco is mentioning right now, that I'm assuming we've heard that directly from a patient that experienced it, then we have to believe that it's happening. And I think when you think about, it is actually now 2 German tourists and a British tourist who have been detained at border crossings, land border crossings. The idea of the random lawlessness of it is actually what that should raise for us. And so I hesitate to answer because it's not entirely clear that this is a thing that is going to be happening all the time in every passport control place in every airport in the country or land border crossing in the country, but that it is possible because it has been happening from somebody that we heard directly from. I think is important to give credence to. I think the danger that I know have been living with is that sometimes we hear stories and they essentially are various forms of deep fakes that have been put out there by actors who are only there to cause fear for in our community. So I believe, Dr. Polanco, but I also would hold lightly until we can get more information about some of the things that have been happening to people.
Because what we're hearing, and like when we hear things that people are unclear about, some folks are not feeling safe to go even to get health care because they worry that once upon a time they were able to get free COVID testing, get free health insurance, get their medical needs met despite their status. But now some folks are, because of the things that have been circulating, they're afraid that even going to report or go to get care is going to compromise their care.
One of the things, and this kind of gets to the question that Councilor Weber was asking earlier, it would help me, at least in my community, if, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, I would love for the City of Boston to have some signs up that they give to all of our community health centers that say this is a safe place and here's what the laws are in Boston. And here's what the laws are that we're going to try to, that you have rights to in Boston, and that this is a place where you can be safe. The Attorney General's office did come out with some guidance for health centers in particular around how they can manage their signage so that you can mark spaces as private or not private, which also prevents either ICE agents themselves or another problem that is actually being seen across the country, people impersonating ICE agents. From coming into your spaces and harassing, your customers or your patients or your students or people that come into our offices. So those are things that actually helping us, providing us with the resources, especially at the community level. So, don't wait for the health center to scramble money out of a very, very tight budget as it is. Provide us with those posters that we can post right away. Right, the Know Your Rights cards are so invaluable. The red cards and the ACLU cards are so invaluable. So provide us with those things so that we can get the words out, and so that slowly we can start combating a lot of the misinformation and helping people understand that all of these things are happening to make us afraid, and that we have to reinforce this idea that part of our strength is refusing to be afraid.
I just wanted to go back to your question, Councilor Julia, and thank you for acknowledging that immigration isn't just a federal issue, but it also goes down to City Council. And I think that a way you guys could help the immigrant community at the moment is to continue doing what you guys have been doing, of making sure that recently arrived immigrants in our communities are still receiving affordable housing, are still receiving the help to find jobs, and things like that. And I also wanted to raise another point, is that a lot of people have been coming to Centro Presente with another concern, which is, I'm not sure what the bill is called, but it basically states that undocumented immigrants are going to have to register on some sort of base, or I don't have much information about that, but it's another concern. And I know it is like something in the federal branch, and that it's real, and so that's another part.
And that, yeah, we actually, and I'll get it to you before the end of this, before we leave this building. We got hit with that the day that it came out in the the Wall Street Journal. And so the reality is, there's nothing that can be done right now. People don't realize you can't put together these databases just like that. It just doesn't work that way. And so nobody has to do anything right now, because anyone who has any kind of interactions with Homeland Security has the CIS account anyways. And because any attempt to enforce it is going to be met with litigation, we're just encouraging people to just wait before they do anything. We do have some flyers and some things that you can pass out through WhatsApp, so we'll make sure that you get that as well. But these are the kinds of things that we've had to scramble at the community level to put together ourselves, and any kind of supports that we could get from the city to help us in that kind of rapid response to misinformation, or helping dial back the fear. That actually would be immensely helpful.
And I know Dr. Polanco might need to leave soon, so if you want to just say goodbye, you should now while you
no. Thank you so much. I have to go pick up my kids in school, but again, I really appreciate you bringing this up to the forefront right now. We have seen how it's hurting our communities. Obviously, healthcare is my field, but like even just going to the hair salon on Saturday, my hairdresser asking me, wait a second, all my clients like undocumented, because people are not coming and the businesses are suffering, and that has impact because like someone mentioned earlier, if you not working, you cannot buy things, you cannot pay your rent, you cannot pay your bills. So I really appreciate you looking into this. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. I'm not going to hold people hostage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Polanco. I've been informed that we have three more people for public testimony. I think we have Leah Hastings in person. Yeah? So we're going to have you give your public testimony. If you can come down, you state your name and your organization, neighborhood, and you'll have your time to give your public testimony. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. This is on, yeah? Okay, beautiful. And thank you for staying as long as you have. I know it's been a lengthy hearing. So my name is Leah Hastings. I'm an attorney. I work at Prisoners Legal Services. I run the Immigrant Detention Conditions Project there. And so in large part, my work focuses on advocating for the rights and the material needs of people in ICE detention in Massachusetts who are detained at Plymouth County Correctional Facility, which has the sole remaining ICE contract for detention in Massachusetts. So it's no accident that one of the most severe consequences of the policies that we're discussing today, detention, is also one of the most obscured from public view. When we're talking about policies that put people in cages, we have to be clear about what that means. So I'm here to shed a little bit of light on the conditions of ICE detention here in Massachusetts, and then to connect that back to broader trends in enforcement and detention and local policies. And so I'm here primarily to just stress the importance of working with community organizations to strengthen the Trust Act if we hope to mount even a fraction of the resistance that has been attributed to Boston. To talk about Plymouth a little bit, in 2022, a DHS Internal Oversight Office conducted an investigation of Plymouth, during which it cited over 70 instances of noncompliance with detention standards. The ensuing report disclosed violations related to legal access, language access, telephone and mail access, medical and mental health care, clothing, diet, and hygiene. Much of the contents of that report remain redacted. Since I started at PLS in fall 2023, I've heard many of these same issues echoed by the detained people that I have worked with. disabled and LGBTQ clients punished with solitary confinement for voicing their needs, clients transferred out of state in retaliation for medical self-advocacy, clients who have resorted to tying shirts around their heads and blocking air vents with towels to fend off the cold, clients who rely on one another for interpretation, clients woken up in the middle of the night and told to pack their things, clients denied sweatshirts, denied nail clippers, denied legal documents, and denied the opportunity to hug their loved ones goodbye. During this same period of time, there has been a significant growth in the number of ICE beds at Plymouth and the number of people detained there. Plymouth's most recent contract renegotiation more than doubled the amount of money received from ICE per person per day. ICE has steadily increased its detention capacity on a regional level as well, expanding its use of Cumberland County Jail in Portland, Maine, and most recently preparing to detain upwards of 500 immigrants at FCI Berlin, a federal prison in northern New Hampshire. When we discuss local policies around collaboration with ICE, this is what we're talking about. Sending people into a system that systematically denies their rights, their dignity, their humanity, and their existence as an integral part of this community. We are talking about a system that assigns a dollar amount to keeping a person in a cage. The Trust Act as it exists now does not do enough to confront this reality. In its December 2024 reaffirmation of the Trust Act, the City Council assured us that ICE Homeland Security Initiatives, HSI, has no part in immigration enforcement. On January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump issued Executive Order 14159, in which he ordered DHS to ensure that the primary mission of the HSI is the enforcement of laws related to illegal entry and unlawful presence of undocumented people in the United States. This new mandate has removed any doubt that continued collaboration with any arm of ICE, including HSI, will directly lead to the detention and deportation of our community members. In parallel with ICE's expansion of detention infrastructure in the region, the federal government has been steadily expanding the criminalization of immigrants under the guise of security, all while cutting funding for healthcare, social services, and other resources that would actually make our communities safer. With the passage of the Lake and Riley Act, undocumented people now face mandatory and indefinite detention without bond for precisely the kinds of charges about which members of the Boston Police Department have repeatedly engaged in communication with ICE. At the same time, the U.S. Department of State's designation of multiple gangs as foreign terrorist organizations has merged and expanded two labels that have long been used and weaponized to justify targeting, surveilling, and disappearing Latina, Black, Arab, and Muslim community members. Our city's youth are at particular risk of being profiled as gang members based on observations of little to no substance, an article of clothing, a tattoo, a passing conversation. Despite the near non-existent standard of proof, it is a label that is nearly impossible to remove once applied. Invocations of Boston's historical and symbolic resistance are not enough. So long as Boston continues to share information with any arm of ICE, or to fund racist, opaque, and unreliable fusion centers like the BRIC, there is no version of the Trust Act that will adequately protect our immigrant communities. We must take concrete action to cut ties with programs and agencies that have time and again proven themselves unworthy of our trust and our resources. For this reason, I'm asking the Boston City Council to work with community organizations to strengthen the Trust Act and to put an end to the City of Boston's collaboration with all sub-agencies of ICE as well as the BRIC. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being with us today. We have two people on Zoom who want to testify. I'm not sure if you're still here, but if you are, I have Henry Barbaro, and then Josiana Colon. Josiana Colon.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Thank you so much for being here. Awesome. Yep, just please stay. So we're gonna do Josiana first, and then we're gonna go with Henry.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. Josiana, you have the floor. in 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Sorry. My name is Josihana Colon. I am a first-generation Dominican American. I am a current third year at Northeastern University, and I grew up in Dorchester. In a community so diverse, I never really thought about whether the Dominican tias at the salon were documented or not because we were in community together. I never really questioned the bodega man's status because he was part of our everyday lives. And I never really questioned the status of those who stood beside me at rallies, fighting for the right to be seen, to be valued, and to simply survive. Today, I am here as a community member, activist, and a student leader. And if I'm being very honest, I'm very angry. I'm worried. And to be honest, I wake up every day with a bad taste in my mouth, unsure of the next headline, next executive order signed off, and the next denial and response. And the political climate right now really worries me. And even in those waking moments of despair, I'm truly, honestly, I am more motivated than ever. And some days this motivation fluctuates, weighed down by the barriers we face in the system designed to keep us stagnant. Yet, in moments of uncertainty, I am reminded that our collective power comes from our ability to support one another. We live in a capitalist society where survival often feels like a competition where the weight of systemic oppression falls disproportionately on our most marginalized communities, and our ability to thrive should not be dictated by the policies that criminalize poverty, homelessness, or the mere existence of those who have historically been denied access to resources like bread, milk, or baby formula, or to simply live in peace. It is up to us to protect one another, to build systems of mutual aid that sustain us where the government has failed, and to redefine safety through community and not through policing. Yet even as we work to uplift one another, we must also hold institutions accountable. We must demand that the Boston Police Department also recognize, with the Trust Act being reaffirmed, also recognize the distrust that they have sown through surveillance over policing and violence. And if they claim to serve and protect, I want them to prove it. Not through performative gestures, but through actions that demonstrate a commitment to justice, engagement beyond corrective measures, and a shift away from possibly treating our neighborhoods as battlegrounds, a city where deportations are routine badges of enforcement. If the police are to exist in our city, I want them to work towards a future as well, where calling for help does not mean that we might be at risk of being dehumanized simply because they catch our whiff of our accent or smell of the habichuelas from the doorway or because of the complexion of our skin. Mayor Wu in her speech in D.C. reminded us that a city's strength is not in its wealth or its infrastructure, but in a well-being of its people. A city is only as strong as its most vulnerable residents, and if we are to build a Boston that truly serves its people, we must be uncompromising in our demand for change. And for that, we must also grow in solidarity, and just not in times of crisis. And so I'm here today to end my testimony in general, to just call for action, for trust in our collective power, and for a vision of justice that truly prioritize people over institutions. And I believe that with further evaluation and kind of being in this meeting as well and kind of just hearing everything that has been mentioned and having clear definitions and communication in its language in the Act Trust, I think that could be definitely a first step as to how the legislation can truly protect our communities. It is with that we demonstrate true solidarity and truly enact trust. And with that, I concede the rest of my time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here and testifying. And I can see Councilor Mejia is very happy that you were here.
I'm very proud. I'm like
Henry. Yep.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. My name is Henry Barbaro. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coalition for Immigration Reform. Thank you to the Boston City Councilors for hearing my testimony. I'm not here to argue the particulars of the Boston Trust Act. I simply want to point out why I believe the Boston Trust Act is so contentious. It's because the Boston City Council is being unclear about the beliefs and goals that you hold surrounding this law. First, the City Council does not fully differentiate between legal and illegal migrants. And you don't support the full enforcement of federal immigration law. In the Council's view, if any migrant is in our country, even if they got here illegally, then you want them to stay. That is an open borders outlook on America. The metaphor to see the forest for the trees really works here. In terms of the enforcement of federal law, there currently are 1.2 million migrants in America with final orders of removal. This means that they have gone through the full due process and have had their civil rights fully respected. But now, these migrants are not leaving and are flouting the law. And the Boston Trust Act protects these lawbreakers. If the City Council does not believe in open borders, then what do you believe in? Do you have a target for how many migrants can come and stay in our country illegally? America currently brings in about 1.1 million legal immigrants every year, which is way more than any other country in the world. The voters are confused. If they believe in the enforcement of federal immigration law, then they are told they are racist and anti-immigrant. So why doesn't the City Council admit they support open borders? I believe you should stop hiding behind some sort of civil rights argument and tell the plain truth so that the voters know what they're dealing with. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate you being with us today. That wraps up our public testimony. I just want to give an opportunity to the lead sponsor to just say a final few words to close us up, and then we'll end today's hearing. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes. As someone who survived, I've been here before, and I will continue showing up. And I really do appreciate all the folks who came here in person to testify, our panel, and our folks who joined us virtually. We hear you, we see you, and we appreciate you. And with that, I think our jobs here in the City Council is to take everything that we hear into consideration and making sure that we're making our justice system be just for everybody, not just for some. And I think that I will leave it there because that's what these times are calling for. So with that, we will still be showing up, just so you all know, and we'll have a series of other hearings, and we're going to get this right.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I definitely want to just thank you, Council President Lujan and Councilor Pepen, for filing this hearing order. I want to thank our panelists, incredible panelists, both here in person and virtually. I think provided definitely a lot of insight, a lot of background, a lot of information for myself and my colleagues. And I want to thank the members of the public, whether you testified or not. Just really appreciate you all being here, staying in tune, civically engaged, and just being with us here today. So with that, I would, this hearing docket on dockets number 0128 and docket 0414 is adjourned. Thank you.